Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever felt the weight of 1,000 silent voices pressing against your ears in an empty hallway? That's what greeted me on my first night shift at Blackwood High School. My name is Alex Mercer, and I needed this job. The night janitor position at Blackwood High wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough to help cover my college tuition. The principal, Mr. Davidson, was surprisingly eager to hire me despite my lack of experience. Now I understand why. Most of your work will be in the West Wing, he had explained during my brief orientation. The East Wing is, well, it's where the old library used to be. We don't use that area much anymore. When I asked why, he hesitated before answering, budget cuts. The fire damage was too extensive to justify full repairs. That first night, I moved my cart through the deserted corridors, mopping floors and emptying trash cans. The West Wing was ordinary enough: classrooms, offices, a gymnasium that smelled of floor polish and adolescent sweat. But as I approached the corridor leading to the East Wing, the air changed. It became heavier, charged with something I couldn't identify. A strip of yellow caution tape blocked the entrance to the East Wing, though it hung limply, as if it had been there for years. Beyond it, the hallway stretched into darkness, the overhead lights either burnt out or never turned on. I shined my flashlight down the corridor, revealing peeling paint and water stains on the ceiling. I wasn't supposed to go there, Mr. Davidson had been clear about that, but curiosity pulled at me. What was so special about an old burned-out library? Surely after decades, there wouldn't be much left to see. As I ducked under the caution tape, a cold draft brushed against my face. My flashlight beam caught motes of dust swirling in elaborate patterns, almost as if they were dancing to some unheard melody. The smell hit me next, not the musty scent of an abandoned building, but something sharper, more acrid. Like paper that had been burned but not completely consumed. The corridor ended at a set of double doors. The wood was blackened around the edges, and the small windows were covered with soot from the inside. A brass plaque, tarnished with age, read Blackwood High School Library, knowledge illuminates the darkness. I pressed my ear against the door, not knowing what I expected to hear. Silence, of course. What else would there be in an abandoned library that had burned down in the 1970s? But there wasn't silence. From beyond the door came the unmistakable sound of pages turning. Slow, deliberate. The soft whisper of paper against paper. I pulled back, heart suddenly pounding. It must have been the ventilation system, I told myself. Old buildings make strange noises. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a thin line of light seeping from beneath the door. Not the sterile white of my flashlight, but the warm amber glow of candlelight. And then, just as I was about to call out, thinking perhaps another staff member was inside, I heard it. A voice, soft and raspy, as if damaged by smoke. "Who's there? Have you come to read with me?" I ran. My footsteps echoed through the empty corridor as I ducked back under the caution tape and didn't stop until I reached the safety of the lit West Wing. I stood there, breathing hard, telling myself I had imagined it all. But the smell of smoke clung to my uniform, and when I looked down at my hands, I saw smudges of soot on my fingertips that hadn't been there before. I didn't mention the incident to anyone the next day. Who would believe me? Besides, I needed this job. So I returned for my second night, determined to stick to the West Wing and finish my shift without incident. But the school felt different now. As I worked, I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, convinced someone was watching me. The ordinary sounds of the building, the hum of fluorescent lights, the click of the heating system seemed to mask something else, something waiting just beneath the surface. "You're being ridiculous," I muttered to myself, wringing out my mop. "Old buildings make weird noises. It's nothing." But then I found the book. It was just after midnight when I entered the science lab to clean. The room was exactly as I'd left it the night before, except for one thing, a book lying open on the teacher's desk. It wasn't a textbook or one of the reference materials that lined the shelves. This was older, bound in faded leather with yellow pages. I approached it cautiously. The book lay open to a page filled with handwritten notes and faded ink. The margins were crowded with annotations, and several passages had been underlined. But what caught my attention was the state of the book itself. The edges of the pages were blackened and curled, as if they had been caught in a fire but somehow survived. I reached out to touch it, then hesitated. Something about the book felt wrong, out of place. It shouldn't have been here. As my fingers brushed against the paper, a shock ran up my arm. The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder, and the overhead lights flickered. From somewhere in the distance came the sound of a door slamming. I jerked my hand back, and the book slammed shut of its own accord. Embossed on the cover in flaking gold leaf was a name, Eleanor Winters, head librarian. My heart hammered in my chest as I backed away from the desk. The book shouldn't have been here. The library had burned down in 1978. According to the plaque in the main hallway, everyone had escaped the fire except for one person, the librarian, who had run back into the burning building to save the rare books collection. As I turned to leave, the lights in the lab went out. Not all at once, but one by one, plunging the room into darkness section by section. I fumbled for my flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. In the sudden blackness, I heard a sound, the soft rustle of pages turning. The book on the desk was open again, its pages flipping rapidly as if caught in a strong wind. But there was no wind in the closed room. A voice whispered from the darkness, the same raspy voice I had heard the night before. So many books lost. So many stories silenced. Will you help me find them? The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I backed toward the door, feeling my way along the lab tables. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice embarrassingly high. "I am the keeper of stories," the voice replied. "And I cannot rest until they are all found." My hand found the doorknob, and I wrenched it open, stumbling out into the hallway. To my horror, I wasn't in the West Wing anymore. Somehow, I had crossed into the forbidden East Wing. The corridor stretched before me, but it was different now. The walls were lined with bookshelves that hadn't been there before, and the air was thick with floating ash. At the end of the hallway, silhouetted against the darkness, stood a figure. Even from a distance, I could see that something was wrong with its shape. The outline was human, but jagged and uneven, as if parts had been burned away. In its hands, it held a book. "Come," the figure said, its voice somehow reaching me clearly despite the distance. "There is so much to read, and the night is still young." I turned and ran in the opposite direction, my footsteps echoing on the tile floor. But no matter how far I ran, the corridor seemed endless, the bookshelves stretching into infinity. And behind me, always behind me, I heard the soft sound of pages turning. I didn't go back to Blackwood High for 2 days. I called in sick, told Mr. Davidson I had the flu. He sounded skeptical but didn't press the issue. Just be back by Friday, he said. The school board is coming for an inspection. During those 2 days, I tried to convince myself that what I'd experienced was just stress, or perhaps a vivid hallucination brought on by the late hours and the isolation of the empty school. But deep down, I knew better. On my 3rd night back, I came prepared. I had spent the previous evening researching the fire at Blackwood High. The local historical society had newspaper clippings, grainy photographs, and even a few survivor accounts. The fire had started in the library during a stormy night in October of 1978. Most of the students and staff had escaped, but the head librarian, Eleanor Winters, had been trapped inside. According to the reports, she had gone back in to save the rare books collection, many of which were irreplaceable first editions. Her body had never been recovered. The fire had been so intense that it had completely gutted the east wing, leaving nothing but ash and blackened walls. I also brought something else with me, a book. Not just any book, but one I had found in a used bookstore downtown. It was old, with a spine that cracked when I opened it, and it smelled faintly of mildew. But it was intact, undamaged by fire or time. As I mopped the floors of the West Wing, I kept the book tucked into my uniform. It felt like a talisman, though I couldn't have explained why. Perhaps I thought that if I encountered the presence again, I could offer it something whole and unburned. The night passed uneventfully until just after 2 in the morning. I had saved the hallway adjacent to the east wing for last, telling myself it was because the floor there was less trafficked and would be quicker to clean. But I knew the real reason. I was both dreading and anticipating what might happen there. As I approached the yellow caution tape, I noticed something different. The tape had been torn down, and the hallway beyond was no longer dark. Instead, it was illuminated by a soft, flickering light that danced on the walls like firelight. I hesitated, feeling the weight of the book in my pocket. Part of me wanted to turn around, to go back to the safety of the well-lit West Wing. But another part, a part one didn't quite understand, urged me forward. The air in the East Wing was thick with the scent of old paper and smoke. But it wasn't the acrid smell of a fresh fire, it was something older, embedded in the walls themselves. As I walked down the corridor, the sound of my footsteps changed. Instead of the hollow echo of an empty hallway, they were muffled, as if I were walking on carpet. And then I saw her. She was standing at the end of the corridor, in front of the library doors. At first glance, she looked like an ordinary woman in her 50s, wearing a conservative dress and cardigan. But as I got closer, I realized that parts of her were wrong. Her right arm ended just below the elbow, the flesh blackened and crumbling. Half of her face was untouched, pale skin, brown eyes, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. But the other half was a ruin of burned tissue and exposed bone. In her remaining hand, she held a book. Its pages were turning by themselves, ash falling from them like snow. "You came back," she said, and her voice was the same raspy whisper I had heard before. "Most don't." I wanted to run, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. What are you?" I managed to ask. "I am Eleanor Winters," she replied. "Or what remains of her." She gestured toward the library doors with her charred arm. I couldn't leave them. All those books, all those stories. They were my responsibility. "The fire was decades ago," I said, my voice shaking. "Why are you still here?" "Because not all of them burned," she said. "Some survived. Scattered. Lost. I must find them and bring them back where they belong." She took a step toward me, and I backed away. The book in her hand continued to turn its pages, faster now, sending more ash into the air. "I can feel it," she said suddenly, her gaze fixing on my pocket. "You have one. You brought one back." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the book I had bought. It looked so ordinary in the strange, flickering light of the corridor. Eleanor Winters' One Good Unwidened. "That's one of them," she whispered. "From the American Literature section. Row 3, shelf 2. She reached out her remaining hand, and I found myself extending the book toward her. But as our fingers touched, something happened. The book began to smoke and then to burn, the pages blackening and curling in an invisible flame. I cried out and dropped it, but it was too late. The book was consumed, leaving nothing but a pile of ash on the floor. "No!" Eleanor cried, her voice echoing strangely in the corridor. "Not again!" The flickering light around us intensified, and I smelled smoke, not the lingering scent of an old fire, but the sharp, acrid smell of new flames. The walls of the corridor began to glow with an internal heat, and I heard the crackle of fire. Eleanor Winters looked at me, her half-destroyed face twisted in anguish. "It's happening again," she said. "The fire. It always comes back." And then, before my eyes, she began to burn. I don't remember how I escaped the East Wing that night. My memories are a blur of smoke and fear, of running blindly through corridors that seemed to shift and change around me. When I finally emerged into the West Wing, I was covered in ash, my uniform singed in places, though I couldn't recall coming into contact with any actual flames. The next morning, I went to the public library. I needed to know more about Eleanor Winters and the fire that had claimed her life. The librarian there, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Chen, helped me locate the archives from 1978. "The Blackwood High fire," she said, shaking her head. "That was before my time, but it's still talked about. Such a tragedy." The newspaper articles told me what I already knew. The fire had started in the library during a storm, possibly from faulty wiring. But there was something else, something that hadn't been in the Historical Society's records. Eleanor Winters was a bit of an eccentric, Mrs. Chen told me as she brought me another stack of microfilm. She had been the head librarian at Blackwood for over 30 years. Some say she was more attached to the books than to people. I found a photograph of Eleanor Winters in a feature article about the school from 1975. She looked much as she had in the hallway, before the fire had consumed half of her, stern, with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, glasses perched on her nose. But her eyes had a warmth to them that the article described as a passion for literature that she imparted to generations of students. Another article, dated just a week before the fire, caught my attention. It described a dispute between Eleanor and the school board over budget cuts that would have eliminated the rare books collection. "She fought like a tiger to keep those books," Mrs. Chen said. "When the fire started, she was in the middle of cataloging them for transfer to a special archive. Some say she should have left them behind, but those who knew her understood why she couldn't. That night, I returned to Blackwood High with a new purpose. I was no longer just a night janitor trying to avoid an unsettling encounter. I wanted to understand what was happening and perhaps, in some small way, to help Eleanor Winters find peace." The East Wing was dark and silent when I approached it. The yellow caution tape had been replaced, though I didn't recall reporting that it had been torn down. I ducked under it and made my way down the corridor to the library doors. They were locked, as they had been on my first night. But now I noticed something I had missed before, a small keyhole in the center of the right-hand door. It was old-fashioned, the kind you might find in an antique piece of furniture. I had no key, of course. But as I stood there, contemplating what to do next, I heard it again, the sound of pages turning, coming from within the locked room. "Eleanor?" I called softly. "Eleanor Winters? I want to help you." The sound stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, slowly, the lock turned with a rusty click. The door swung open just a crack, revealing darkness beyond. I hesitated, then pushed the door wider. The room that had once been the library was in ruins. The ceiling had partially collapsed, and the walls were blackened with decades-old soot. The floor was littered with debris, broken shelves, shattered glass, and the fragile remains of books that had been reduced to ash. But in the center of the room, something impossible was happening. A small circle of light, like a spotlight, illuminated a section of the floor that was clean and untouched by the fire. Within this circle stood a wooden desk, and seated at it was Eleanor Winters. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment she appeared whole, no burned flesh, no missing limbs. Just an elderly librarian surrounded by books. "You came back," she said, her voice clearer than before. "And you brought no fire with you this time." "I want to understand," I said, taking a cautious step forward. "Why are you still here? What are you looking for?" Eleanor gestured to the desk in front of her, where a large leather-bound book lay open. "This was the catalog," she said. "Every book in the library, recorded by hand. I knew them all. Where they belonged. What they contained." She ran her fingers over the pages, which were miraculously intact despite the destruction around us. But now they're scattered. Lost. Burned. "The rare books collection," I said, remembering what I had read. "That's what you went back for." She nodded. "Irreplaceable. First editions. Manuscripts that existed nowhere else. I couldn't let them burn." "But they did burn," I said gently. "And you with them." Eleanor looked at me, and for a moment I saw the reality of her situation reflected in her eyes, the knowledge that she had died in this room, that decades had passed, that her quest to save the books had failed. "Not all of them burned," she whispered. "Some survived. Hidden. Protected. I can feel them out there, calling to me. But I can't leave this place to find them." As she spoke, the circle of light around her began to dim. The intact appearance of the desk and books flickered, like a projection that was losing power. Eleanor herself seemed to waver, her form shifting between the whole woman I had just seen and the half-burned specter I had encountered in the hallway. "The fire is always coming back," she said, her voice growing raspy again. "It never truly goes out. It just waits." And then I smelled it, smoke, fresh and acrid, not the lingering scent of an old fire, but the unmistakable smell of new flames. From the corners of the room, orange light began to flicker, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "It's happening again," Eleanor said, her voice now a frightened whisper. "The fire. It always comes back for me." The flames appeared along the walls, licking up from the floor, consuming the debris anew. The heat in the room rose rapidly, and I felt sweat break out on my forehead. "We have to get out of here," I said, reaching for her across the desk. But Eleanor shook her head. "I can't leave them," she said, gesturing to the phantom books that surrounded her. "They're my responsibility." The flames climbed higher, and the smoke thickened. I could feel the searing heat on my skin, hear the crackle and roar of the fire as it consumed everything in its path. They're not real, I shouted over the noise. The books are gone, Eleanor. They burned decades ago. Not all of them, she insisted, her voice somehow carrying over the roar of the flames. Some survived. I can feel them. If I could just. Her words were cut off as a beam from the ceiling, weakened by the phantom fire, crashed down between us. I stumbled backward, shielding my face from the shower of sparks and debris. When I looked up again, Eleanor was gone, and the fire was everywhere, consuming the room in impossible heat and light. I turned and ran for the door, but it had vanished in the smoke and flames. I was trapped, just as Eleanor had been all those years ago, in a burning library with no escape. I was going to die in a fire that had happened 47 years ago. The thought was absurd, but as the flames closed in around me, consuming the phantom library of Eleanor Winter's memory, I couldn't deny the very real heat searing my skin, the smoke filling my lungs, the terror gripping my heart. I dropped to my knees, trying to find cleaner air near the floor. Through the smoke, I could see nothing but fire, dancing, devouring, relentless. The roar of it filled my ears, drowning out even the sound of my own desperate coughing. Eleanor! I screamed, though I doubted she could hear me over the inferno. Eleanor, please! Help me! And then, through the wall of flames, I saw her. Not the half-burned specter I had encountered in the hallway, nor the whole librarian I had briefly glimpsed at the desk, but something in between, a woman being consumed by fire, yet somehow still standing, still moving. She was carrying something, a book, its edges blackening but its pages still intact. She struggled toward me, pushing through the flames as if they were a physical barrier. Take it, she gasped when she reached me, holding out the book with hands that were rapidly turning to ash. Save it. Please. I reached out and took the book from her, feeling its weight, its reality amidst the nightmare of phantom fire. It was the catalog she had shown me, the handwritten record of every book that had once been in the Blackwood High School library. Run, Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. The door is there. She pointed through the smoke to where a rectangle of lesser darkness suggested an exit. Come with me, I urged, grabbing her arm. But my hand passed through her as if she were made of smoke. I can't, she said, her form beginning to fade. I'm tied to this place, to this moment. But the book can leave. It can be saved. I clutched the catalog to my chest, feeling its edges singeing my uniform. What do I do with it? I asked. Find them, Eleanor said, her voice growing fainter as her form dispersed like ash in the wind. Find the books that survived. Bring them back where they belong. And then she was gone, leaving only a swirl of embers where she had stood. I ran, holding the catalog tight against my chest, following the direction Eleanor had indicated. The smoke was so thick I could barely see, but somehow I found the door, not the one I had entered through, but a different one, hidden behind a bookshelf that was now nothing but a frame of burning wood. I burst through it and found myself not in the hallway of the East Wing, but outside the school entirely, in the parking lot. The night air was cool and clean, shocking my smoke-filled lungs. I fell to my knees on the asphalt, gasping and coughing. When I finally caught my breath and looked up, the school stood before me, dark and silent. There was no sign of fire, no alarm, no emergency vehicles. Just the quiet hulk of Blackwood High against the night sky. The catalog was still in my hands, though its edges were blackened and curled. I opened it carefully, expecting to find the pages destroyed by the heat. But they were intact, filled with Eleanor's neat handwriting, titles, authors, publication dates, shelf locations. And at the back, on the last page, was something new. A note written in a shaky hand that I somehow knew was Eleanor's, though it looked different from the careful script that filled the rest of the book. Not all of them burned. Some escaped. Find them. Bring them home. Then perhaps I can rest. Below this was a list of 23 titles, with notations beside each one indicating where they might have been taken in the chaos of the fire. Some had been checked out by students, others borrowed by teachers. A few had been moved to other shelves for repair or cataloging. I closed the book and stood up, my legs shaky but my mind clear. I knew what I had to do. It took me 6 months to track down all 23 books. Some were easy to find, still in the possession of people who had checked them out before the fire or their descendants. Others required more detective work, leading me to use bookstores, estate sales, and once to an attic in a house that had been owned by a former Blackwood High English teacher. Each time I found one, I would bring it back to the school at night, to the East Wing corridor where I had first encountered Eleanor. I would place the book on the floor before the library doors, and by morning it would be gone. I never saw Eleanor again, not fully. But sometimes, as I worked in the West Wing, I would catch a glimpse of movement at the edge of my vision, a figure passing quickly down a hallway, or the shadow of someone sitting at a desk in an empty classroom. And occasionally, very rarely, I would hear the sound of pages turning, followed by a soft sigh of contentment. The last book on the list was the hardest to find, a first edition of The Great Gatsby, signed by F. Scott Fitzgerald himself. It had been given to the school as a gift, one of the prizes of the rare books collection. I finally located it in a private collection in Chicago, and it cost me every penny of my savings to purchase it. On the night I brought it back to Blackwood High, something was different. The yellow caution tape across the entrance to the East Wing had been removed, and the hallway beyond was lit not by the flickering light of phantom fire, but by ordinary fluorescent bulbs. I walked down the corridor, the book clutched in my hands, and found the library doors standing open. Beyond them was not the ruined room I had seen before, but a fully restored library, shelves lined with books, tables and chairs arranged neatly, the smell of old paper and wood polish in the air. And at the central desk sat Eleanor Winters, whole and unburned, her hair in its neat bun, her glasses perched on her nose. She looked up as I entered, and smiled. "You found it," she said, her voice no longer raspy but clear and warm. "The last one." I placed the book on the desk in front of her. "It wasn't easy," I said, "but I promised I would." Eleanor picked up the book, running her fingers over the cover with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "Now they're all home." She stood up and walked to a shelf near the rare books section, where she carefully placed the Gatsby in an empty spot that seemed to have been waiting for it. As she did, a sense of completion filled the room, like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Eleanor turned back to me, and I saw that she was fading, becoming transparent. But not in the way she had in the fire. This was a gentle dissolution, peaceful and right. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," she said, her voice fading along with her form, "I can rest. And so can they." She gestured around the library, and I realized that the books too were fading, becoming translucent, then disappearing altogether. The shelves, the tables, the entire room was dissolving like mist in the morning sun. The last thing to disappear was Eleanor's face, still smiling, finally at peace. I stood alone in the empty, damaged room that had once been the Blackwood High School library. The ceiling was still partially collapsed, the walls still blackened with soot. but the air was clear, free from the smell of smoke that had lingered for decades. I walked out, closing the door behind me. As I did, I heard a final sound, not pages turning, not fire crackling, but the soft thud of a book being closed for the last time. 2 weeks later, the school board announced that the East Wing would be renovated, the old library space converted into a new computer lab and study center. When they began the work, they found something unexpected, a small collection of books, 23 in all, somehow preserved in a corner of the room that had been protected from the worst of the fire and the subsequent water damage. Among them was a first edition of The Great Gatsby, signed by F. Scott Fitzgerald. They are now displayed in a glass case in the main hallway of Blackwood High, alongside a photograph of Eleanor Winters and a plaque that reads, "In memory of Eleanor Winters, head librarian who gave her life to preserve knowledge and stories for future generations." Sometimes, late at night, when the school is empty and silent, the security cameras in that hallway capture a curious phenomenon, the pages of the books in the display case turning slowly, one by one, as if an invisible hand is reading them. But there is no fire, no smoke, no burned specter wandering the halls. Just the quiet presence of a librarian, finally at peace, forever among the books she loved. Have you ever wondered what happens to souls lost at sea? The question hung in the air of the small coastal bar as I nursed my drink, trying to ignore the old fisherman who had taken a seat beside me. His weathered face told stories of decades spent on the water, and his eyes reflected the haunting depths of the Atlantic. I hadn't come to Jenkins Cove for ghost stories or local legends. I was here to escape, to find solitude after my naval career had ended abruptly with an honorable discharge that felt anything but honorable. "I'm not much for tall tales," I replied, signaling the bartender for another whiskey. The old man leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. 3 days ago, the Marianne spotted something strange off Morris Island. A schooner, early 19th century by the look of it, drifting without wind. He paused, letting the information sink in. Coast Guard went out to investigate. Found nothing but an empty deck and bloodstains. I would have dismissed it as local folklore designed to entertain tourists, but there was something in his eyes that made my skin prickle. 20 years in the Navy had taught me to trust my instincts, and right now, they were screaming. "Got a name for this phantom ship?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "The Windless Wanderer," he replied. "Some say it's been sailing these waters since 1838, never changing, never decaying. Always appearing when a storm is brewing." Outside, the early evening sky had darkened prematurely, heavy clouds rolling in from the sea. The gentle tapping of raindrops against the windows gradually increased in intensity, creating a rhythmic backdrop to our conversation. "I've got a boat," I heard myself say before I could think better of it. Where exactly did they spot this ghost ship? The following morning, I pushed my 28-foot fishing boat through the choppy waters off the South Carolina coast. The storm had passed, leaving behind a gray, unsettled sky and a restless sea. Something about the old man's story had gotten under my skin, awakening a curiosity I thought had died with my naval career. As I navigated around Morris Island, I noticed something strange about the water, currents moving against the tide, creating patterns that shouldn't exist. My depth finder began to malfunction, the digital display flickering between impossible readings. One moment it showed 30 feet, the next over 1,000, then nothing at all. The air grew unnaturally still. The constant background noise of seabirds disappeared, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. In the distance, a fog bank rolled toward me, too localized to be natural, too dense to navigate through. But it wasn't the fog that made my heart stutter. It was what waited within it, the silhouette of a tall ship, its ragged sails hanging limp in the windless air, drifting inexorably toward me. I cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the gentle lapping of waves against my hull. The approaching vessel made no sound as it glided through the water, no creaking of wood, no flapping of canvas, nothing to suggest it was a physical object displacing water. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my binoculars. Through the lenses, I could make out details that sent cold fingers of dread down my spine. The ship was indeed an old schooner, its wooden hull weathered but somehow untouched by the ravages of time. No algae clung to its sides, no barnacles marred its hull. The sails, though tattered, were a ghostly white that seemed to absorb the gray light rather than reflect it. Most unsettling of all was the complete absence of life. No movement on deck, no face peering from behind the wheel. Yet the ship moved with purpose, as if guided by invisible hands. "This is Commander Elliot James of the private vessel Redemption," I called out, my voice sounding small against the vast silence. "Do you require assistance?" Only the echo of my own words answered me. I should have turned back. Every instinct honed by years at sea warned me to retreat, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the approaching vessel. But curiosity, or perhaps something else, kept me anchored in place. The fog thickened around me, reducing visibility to mere yards. The temperature dropped suddenly, my breath fogging in front of my face despite the mild spring day. A faint sound reached my ears, distant at first, then growing clearer. It was the sound of wood striking wood, rhythmic and deliberate. Footsteps on a deck. My radio crackled to life, startling me. Through the static, I could make out a voice, distant and distorted, returning to port, unnatural activity, stay clear of Sector 7. I reached for the radio, but before I could respond, it died completely. So did the engine when I tried to restart it. The electrical system on my boat was dead, leaving me adrift in the fog with the approaching phantom ship. Time seemed to stretch and distort. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, watching the ghostly schooner grow larger in the mist. It was close enough now that I could read the faded name on its bow, Windless Wanderer. The old fisherman's words echoed in my mind. Never changing, never decaying. Always appearing when a storm is brewing. But it wasn't just the ship that concerned me now. The water around my boat had begun to change. What had been clear blue-green was now darker, almost black, with strange luminescent patterns swirling beneath the surface. The patterns seemed to form and reform into shapes that almost resembled faces, mouths open in silent screams. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a hallucination born of fear and isolation. But as the windless wanderer drew alongside my boat, close enough that I could have reached out and touched its weathered hull, I knew with terrible certainty that I was in the presence of something that defied rational explanation. A rope ladder unfurled from the deck of the schooner, swinging gently though there was no wind to move it. It was an invitation. Or a trap. Against every rational thought, I found myself reaching for it. The moment my hands gripped the rope ladder, a jolt of ice-cold energy surged through my body. The sensation wasn't painful, but profoundly wrong, like plunging into water that wasn't wet, or breathing air that provided no oxygen. I hesitated, one foot on the lowest rung, staring up at the looming hull of the Windless Wanderer. "This is madness," I whispered to myself. Yet I continued climbing. The wood of the ship felt strange beneath my fingers, solid yet somehow insubstantial, as if it existed in multiple states at once. As I pulled myself over the gunwale onto the main deck, the full reality of my situation hit me. I was aboard a ship that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist. The deck stretched before me, immaculately preserved yet emanating an aura of neglect. Everything was exactly as one would expect on a 19th century schooner, from the polished brass fittings to the neatly coiled ropes. But there was an unnatural stillness to it all, as if I were standing in a museum exhibit rather than on a functioning vessel. And then I saw the bloodstains. Dark brown splatters marred the otherwise pristine deck, trailing from the helm toward the captain's quarters. Not fresh, but not faded either, frozen in time like everything else aboard the Wanderer. My naval training kicked in, and I found myself moving in a careful sweep pattern across the deck, checking for any immediate threats. The ship was eerily silent, the only sound the faint creaking of wood that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As I approached the captain's quarters, the temperature dropped further. My breath formed clouds in front of my face, and a thin layer of frost began to form on the metal doorknob. Something wanted me to open that door. Something was waiting. I hesitated, my hand hovering inches from the knob. The rational part of my mind screamed at me to turn back, to return to my boat while I still could. But another part, a deeper instinct, told me that I had passed the point of return the moment I touched the ladder. "Who's there?" I called out, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Show yourself." The silence that followed was deafening, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. And then, just as I began to think I had imagined it all, a sound, soft at first, then growing clearer. It was a scratching, a slow, deliberate dragging of something sharp across wood. It was coming from behind the door. My hand trembled as it closed around the knob. The metal burned with cold, sending needles of pain shooting up my arm. But I turned it anyway, pushing the door open with a creak that seemed to echo across the endless sea. The captain's quarters were bathed in an unnatural blue light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Charts and maps covered a large desk, held in place by navigational tools that looked both antique and strangely advanced. But it was what sat behind the desk that made my blood freeze in my veins. A figure in a captain's uniform, its back to me, was hunched over a logbook. The scratching sound came from the quill pen it held, moving across the page with horrible precision. Slowly, the figure turned. Where its face should have been was only a swirling void, a miniature maelstrom of darkness that seemed to pull at my very essence. I could feel it trying to draw something out of me, my memories, my identity, my soul. I stumbled backward, a scream locked in my throat. The figure rose, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. It reached toward me with hands that were nothing but bone, the flesh long since stripped away. "W, what do you want?" I managed to gasp. The void where its face should be seen to smile, though how I perceived this, I couldn't say. And then it spoke, in a voice that was not a voice, but rather a series of impressions forming words directly in my mind. A new captain. A new crew. A new journey. The world tilted sideways, and I felt myself falling, though I never hit the deck. I awoke to the gentle rocking of the ship, momentarily disoriented. How long had I been unconscious? Minutes? Hours? The quality of light hadn't changed, that unnatural blue glow still emanating from the walls. But something else had changed. The ship was no longer silent. From above deck came the sounds of activity, footsteps, the creaking of rigging, muffled voices calling to one another. A crew where there had been none before. I pulled myself to my feet, my head throbbing with a dull ache. The captain's quarters were empty now, the faceless figure gone. The logbook lay open on the desk, and I forced myself to approach it, to look at what had been written. The page was filled with names, dates, and locations. Each entry followed the same pattern: a name, a date, a set of coordinates, and a single word: claimed. The last entry made my blood run cold. Elliot James. April 12, 2025. Morris Island. Pending. Today's date. My name. I backed away from the desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. I had to get off this ship. I turned to flee, only to find my path blocked by a figure standing in the doorway. Unlike the captain, this one had a face, or what remained of one. The features were those of a man who had spent too long in the water, bloated and discolored, with patches of skin missing to reveal the gray flesh beneath. He wore the uniform of a 19th century sailor, soaked through in dripping seawater that evaporated before it touched the floor. "The captain wants you on deck," the figure said, its voice gurgling as if spoken through liquid. "It's time for the gathering." I looked around desperately for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My hand closed around a brass sextant on the desk. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, raising the sextant threateningly. The figure tilted its head at an impossible angle, regarding me with milky eyes that showed no pupil or iris. "You misunderstand. You're already part of the crew. The captain has claimed you." "I don't belong here," I insisted, my voice cracking. "Neither did we," the figure replied, its voice almost sad. "But the sea takes what it wants, and the Wanderer sails on." More figures appeared behind the first, each in a state of decay that spoke of different eras, different fates. Men and women, young and old, all bearing the marks of a death at sea, some violently, others slowly. Their eyes were all the same, though, that milky white that reflected the blue light of the cabin. They parted, forming a corridor that led to the stairs up to the main deck. It was clear I had no choice but to follow. As I ascended the stairs, the air grew colder, the blue light giving way to a gray twilight that seemed to exist outside of time. The main deck was now crowded with the ghostly crew, dozens of them standing in silent formation, all facing the helm where the faceless captain stood. When I emerged onto the deck, all eyes turned to me. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of water against the hull, a sound that seemed wrong somehow, as if the water itself was unnatural. The captain raised a bony hand, beckoning me forward. Each step I took felt like moving through molasses, my body resisting even as my feet carried me inexorably toward the waiting figure. "Why me?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the vast silence. "Why did you bring me here?" The captain's voice filled my mind again, a chorus of whispers rather than a single voice. "You were already here. You have always been here. Every soul lost at sea finds its way to the Wanderer eventually." "But I'm not dead," I protested, though even as I said it, doubt began to creep in. "I'm not dead," I repeated, more to convince myself than anything. The captain's response was not in words this time, but in images that flashed through my mind, my boat capsizing in a sudden squall, my body sinking beneath the waves, the search parties finding nothing but floating debris. Had that happened? Was I remembering my own death? "No," I whispered, shaking my head to clear the visions. "You're lying. This isn't real." The captain extended its hand toward me, the bones gleaming in a strange light. In its palm lay a small object, a naval insignia, my insignia, the one I'd received when I was first commissioned. The one that had been buried with my brother after his ship went down 5 years ago. My knees buckled as realization washed over me. I stared at the insignia in the captain's skeletal hand, memories flooding back with terrible clarity. Not my memories, my brother's. The last moments of his life aboard the USS Resilience during a training exercise gone wrong. The crushing pressure of water, the desperate struggle for breath, the final acceptance of the inevitable. They weren't my experiences, but I felt them as if they were my own. In that moment, I understood what the Windless Wanderer truly was, not just a ghost ship, but a vessel of memories, a repository for the final moments of those lost at sea. "I'm not Thomas," I said, my voice steadier now. "I'm his brother. I'm alive." The faceless captain tilted its head, the swirling void where its features should be seeming to study me more intently. The spectral crew murmured among themselves, the sound like waves breaking on a distant shore. "You carry his memory," the captain's voice resonated in my mind. "You came seeking answers. The sea brought you to us." "I didn't come looking for this," I protested. "I was just curious about a story." Curiosity is merely the conscious mind's attempt to justify what the soul already knows. "You sought your brother, and now you have found him." The captain gestured toward the crew, and they parted once more. A figure stepped forward from their midst, and my heart nearly stopped. Thomas stood before me, not as the decayed specter I'd expected, but as he had been in life, strong, proud, with the same crooked smile I had known since childhood. "Elliot," he said, his voice achingly familiar. "You shouldn't have come looking for me." I reached out, half expecting my hand to pass through him, but his grip was solid as he clasped my forearm. "I didn't know I was," I admitted. "Not consciously. But after your death, I couldn't stay in the Navy. Couldn't stay away from the sea either. I've been drifting. Like the Wanderer, Thomas finished for me. We all drift eventually. But you still have a choice. You can leave this place." The captain's response was immediate and forceful, a cold pressure inside my skull. "None who board the Wanderer may leave. He has seen us. He has heard us. He belongs to the sea now." Thomas turned to the captain, standing tall despite the palpable power emanating from the faceless figure. "He's not claimed yet. The log says pending. There's still time." The air grew thick with tension, the blue light pulsing with the captain's anger. The spectral crew backed away, leaving the three of us in a circle of empty deck. "What happens now?" I asked, looking between my brother and the captain. "A choice," the captain conceded. "Take your brother's place aboard the Wanderer, or return to your world, but with the knowledge that you can never speak of what you've seen, never seek us out again." "And if I choose to stay?" I asked. Thomas gripped my shoulder, his eyes intense. "Don't. Please, Elliot. I've made my peace with this existence. You still have a life to live." I looked around at the ghostly crew, at the unnatural sea surrounding us, at the faceless captain waiting for my decision. Part of me wanted to stay, to join this eternal voyage rather than return to my aimless existence. But in Thomas's eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in my own reflection for years. Hope. "I choose to return," I said finally. The captain was motionless for a long moment, the void of its face swirling more violently. Then, with a gesture that seemed almost resigned, it pointed toward the side of the ship where a rope ladder now hung, leading down to my boat which drifted alongside. "Remember the terms," the captain's voice echoed in my mind. "Silence. Or we will claim you still." Thomas walked with me to the ladder. "Live well, little brother," he said, embracing me one last time. "And when your time truly comes, perhaps we'll sail together again." As I descended the ladder, the fog closed in around me, obscuring the windless wanderer from view. By the time I reached my boat, the ghostly ship had vanished entirely, leaving only undisturbed water where it had been. My engine started on the first try. The electrical systems functioned perfectly. It was as if nothing had happened at all, except for the naval insignia clutched in my hand, an impossible souvenir from a ship that shouldn't exist. 3 days later, I sat in the same coastal bar where the old fisherman had first told me the tale of the windless wanderer. He wasn't there, and when I asked about him, the bartender looked at me strangely. Old man with a beard? Talks about ghost ships? Nobody like that comes in here, sir. I nodded, not surprised. My mistake. As I left the bar, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. For a moment, just a moment, my eyes appeared milky white, reflecting a light that wasn't there. Out on the water, storm clouds were gathering. And somewhere beyond them, I knew, the windless wanderer continued its eternal voyage, carrying its crew of lost souls, including my brother, across seas that existed somewhere between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. I never spoke of what I saw aboard that phantom ship. But sometimes, when the wind dies and the seas grow unnaturally calm, I find myself looking out at the horizon, wondering if the wanderer sails nearby, and if my brother stands at its rail, watching. And I wonder if, one day, I might join him after all. Did you know that a mother can identify her baby's cry among 100 others? The night had settled over Patterson Park with an unusual stillness. The kind of quiet that makes you notice your own breathing, that makes every snapped twig sound like a gunshot. I hadn't planned on cutting through the park after my late shift at Memorial Hospital, but construction had blocked my usual route, and I was desperate to get home to my daughter. My feet crunched along the gravel path as the sodium lights cast long, distorted shadows across the ground. 20 years in Georgia, and I never felt this uneasy in these familiar surroundings. Something was different tonight. The air hung heavy with an odd scent, not quite floral, not quite decay. I pulled my coat tighter despite the mild spring temperature. The moonlight filtering through the trees created shifting patterns that seemed to follow my movements. Was that shadow always there? Did it just move? Then I heard it. The distinct, unmistakable sound of an infant crying. My pace faltered. At 3 a.m, there shouldn't be anyone in the park, let alone a baby. I strained my ears, convinced I had imagined it. But there it was again, a high-pitched wail, desperate and forlorn, coming from somewhere near the old playground. As a labor and delivery nurse for 15 years, that sound triggered something primal in me. Before I could process the logic that no mother would have her child in an unlit park at this hour, my feet were already moving toward the sound. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and strained. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" The crying continued, unwavering. Not the intermittent cry of a fussy baby, but a continuous, almost rhythmic wailing. As I approached the playground, the sodium light above flickered, plunging the area into momentary darkness before sputtering back to life. In that brief flash of renewed light, I saw it, a small bundle of cloth beneath the slide, a baby bottle glinting beside it. My heart hammered in my chest as I rushed forward. "Oh my God," I whispered, dropping to my knees. The bundle was wrapped in a pale blue blanket, carefully folded. A pacifier lay nearby, and the bottle was half full with what appeared to be milk. But there was no baby. The crying continued, seemingly emanating from the empty blanket. I reached out with trembling fingers to touch the fabric, still warm to the touch. "Where are you?" I whispered, panic beginning to claw at my throat. Where is the baby? The park had grown impossibly silent again, except for that crying, now sounding as if it came from right beside my ear, then from the trees behind me, then from beneath the slide again. I spun around, searching frantically in every direction. Hello? I shouted, my voice cracking. Is anyone there? Please, if your baby is missing. The light flickered again, and in that moment of darkness, I felt something brush against my ankle, soft, like tiny fingers grasping. When the light returned, the bottle was gone. But the crying continued. I scrambled backward, my palms scraping against the playground's rubber matting. The baby's wailing had changed, becoming more urgent, more insistent. It seemed to drift on the night air, impossible to pinpoint. Coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. This isn't happening, I muttered, trying to steady my breathing. 15 years in the maternity ward had exposed me to every variation of infant distress, but this wasn't right. The cry had an odd echoing quality, as if coming from the bottom of a well. I fumbled for my phone, fingers shaking as I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty swings swaying gently despite the absence of wind. I swept the light across the playground, over the blanket, under the slide. The wailing stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse somehow, oppressive and expected. My flashlight beam flickered across the sandbox and caught something small and white. A baby sock. It hadn't been there seconds before, I was certain. Okay, Olivia, think, I whispered to myself. My daughter Madison had just turned 3. I knew what it was to be a mother. Yet there was a child in danger. I couldn't just walk away. But nothing about this made sense. I took a tentative step toward the sandbox. The crying began again, now behind me. I whirled around, nearly dropping my phone. The baby blanket was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs as I backed toward the park path. Rational explanations raced through my mind, a speaker hidden somewhere, a cruel prank, my exhaustion after a 12-hour shift creating auditory hallucinations. But then I saw her, a woman standing at the edge of the tree line, partially obscured by shadow. She was unnaturally still, watching me. Her outline was wrong somehow, too thin, too angular. In her arms, she appeared to be cradling something. Hello? I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. Is that your baby? Do you need help? She didn't respond, didn't move. I took a cautious step forward, raising my phone to better illuminate her. The light didn't reach her face, seeming to bend around her as if the darkness was swallowing it. Ma'am? Are you okay? The crying had stopped again. The park was deadly quiet except for my own ragged breathing and the distant sound of traffic beyond the trees. Then she moved, a jerky, unnatural motion, and stepped back into the deeper shadows of the woods. Wait! I called, moving forward without thinking. If that's your baby, they sound distressed. I'm a nurse. I can help. My instincts were screaming at me to run in the opposite direction, but 15 years of training, of responding to cries of pain and distress, overrode my fear. I followed, sweeping my flashlight across the tree line. As I reached the edge of the trees, the smell hit me, sour milk and something else, something earthier and more primal. The woman was gone, but there on the ground was another baby bottle, this one cracked and leaking formula onto the dirt. The crying began again, deeper in the woods now. Softer, more plaintive. Almost coaxing. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I stepped between the trees, following the sound. The park I had known for 20 years suddenly felt alien, the familiar paths twisted and wrong. My flashlight beam seemed to grow dimmer with each step, casting strange, shifting shadows among the trees. "Where are you?" I called, my voice sounding muffled in the dense undergrowth. "Please, I just want to help." The crying led me deeper, to a small clearing I didn't recognize. In the center lay a pile of baby clothes, pristine, carefully folded onesies, bibs, tiny socks. Too many for one infant. Too new and clean to have been abandoned here. As I stared, transfixed by this impossible sight, the crying surrounded me, coming from all directions now, not one baby, but many. A chorus of infant wails rising in the darkness. And I wasn't alone in the clearing. The shadows at the edge of the clearing were moving. At first, I thought it was a trick of my weakening flashlight, the battery dying after prolonged use. But as I stared, mouth dry with terror, I could make out distinct figures, women, standing perfectly still among the trees. Their features were obscured by darkness, but their postures were all the same, arms cradled as if holding infants. 1, 3, 5, 7 of them, surrounding me. The crying had become deafening, a cacophony of infant distress that seemed to vibrate through my skull. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it did nothing to muffle the sound. "What do you want?" I screamed over the wailing. "Please, stop this." My phone's flashlight died completely, plunging me into darkness broken only by thin shafts of moonlight penetrating the canopy. In this dim illumination, I could see them more clearly. The women were moving now, swaying rhythmically as if rocking their invisible babies. Their movements were synchronized, unnatural. I stumbled backward, tripping over the pile of baby clothes. As I fell, my hand landed on something cold and hard, the pacifier from the playground, now cracked down the middle. Panic overwhelmed me. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly, no longer caring which direction would lead me out of the woods. Branches whipped my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I kept moving, driven by pure terror. Behind me, the crying followed, keeping pace no matter how fast I ran. "Madison," I gasped, my daughter's name becoming a talisman. "I have to get back to Madison." My foot caught on an exposed root, sending me sprawling onto the forest floor. Pain shot through my ankle as I tried to stand, forcing me to hobble forward at a much slower pace. I was lost now. The familiar pathways of Patterson Park transformed into an endless, twisted maze. Through the trees ahead, I spotted a playground structure. Relief flooded through me. I had somehow circled back to where this nightmare began. If I could just reach the main path, I could escape the park entirely. But as I limped closer, I realized this wasn't the same playground. It was older, dilapidated. The slide was rusted, the swings hung broken from a warped frame. This playground had been demolished years ago when they renovated the park. It couldn't possibly be here. Yet it was, and sitting on one of the broken swings was a woman. Unlike the shadowy figures in the woods, I could see her clearly in the moonlight. She wore a hospital gown, stained dark across the abdomen. Her hair hung in limp strands around a face that was young yet aged by grief. In her arms, she cradled a bundle wrapped in a blue blanket, the same blanket I had seen at the start of this nightmare. The crying had stopped. "Is that your baby?" I asked, my voice hoarse from screaming. "Please, let me help you." The woman lifted her head slowly, her movements heavy with sorrow. "They took him," she whispered. "I hear him crying every night. but when I search, I find only empty blankets and discarded bottles. My body trembled, partly from exhaustion, partly from fear. Who took him? What happened to your baby? The same thing that will happen to yours, she replied, her voice suddenly clear and cold. If you're not careful. If you trust the wrong people. I slid down my spine. My daughter is safe at home with her father. The woman's expression shifted, a terrible smile spreading across her face. Are you certain? My phone rang, the sudden noise making me jump. The screen illuminated, showing my husband's name. With shaking fingers, I answered. Olivia? His voice was tense, frightened. Where are you? You should have been home hours ago. I'm in the park, I managed to say, my eyes still fixed on the woman with the bundle. I got lost. What's wrong? Is Madison okay? There was a pause, then Madison won't stop crying. I can't get her to settle. She keeps asking for you, says she heard you calling her. The woman on the swing stood, the motion fluid and wrong. She held out the bundle toward me. Take him, she said. I've been waiting for someone who could hear him crying. I have to go, I told my husband, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm coming home now. Keep Madison with you. Don't let her out of your sight. As I ended the call, the woman had moved closer, now standing directly before me. She thrust the bundle into my arms before I could react. Take him, she repeated. Please. Against every instinct, I looked down at the bundle in my arms. The weight in my arms felt real, the solid heft of an infant, the warmth radiating through the blue blanket. My nurse's hands instinctively adjusted to support the head, a motion burned into muscle memory from years of handling newborns. I don't understand, I whispered, unable to look away from the bundle. Whose baby is this? Look at him, the woman urged, her voice now gentle. Really look. With trembling fingers, I pulled back a corner of the blanket. The cry that escaped my lips echoed through the trees. There was no baby. In my arms lay a crude doll made of sticks bound together with hospital identification bracelets, dozens of them bearing different names, different dates. Some were yellowed with age, others looked new. I dropped the horrific bundle and stumbled backward. What is this? What are you doing? The woman's face crumpled in anguish. You don't see him either. No one ever does. She fell to her knees beside the discarded bundle, gathering it back into her arms with tender care. They told me he was stillborn, that I never even held him. But I hear him crying every night. Something about her story tugged at my memory, a hospital legend from when I first started at Memorial. A patient who had lost her child during delivery, who had escaped from the psychiatric ward and wandered into Patterson Park on a winter night. They had found her the next morning, frozen to death beneath the slide of the old playground, clutching a bundle of blankets. That playground had been demolished 20 years ago. Nausea rose in my throat. Esther Cooper, I whispered, the name surfacing from hospital gossip heard years ago. That's your name, isn't it? Her head snapped up, eyes wide. You know me? I've heard your story. You were a patient at Memorial Hospital. You lost your baby in 1993. She nodded slowly. They said he never cried. But I heard him. I still hear him. She looked past me toward the woods. And now there are others. So many others. I followed her gaze. The figures had emerged from the trees, standing in a silent semicircle at the edge of the playground. In the moonlight, I could now see them clearly, women of different ages, different eras even, judging by their clothing. Each one cradled an empty bundle. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, fear giving way to desperate anger. "I can't help you. I can't bring back your children." "No," Esther agreed, rising to her feet. "But you can stop it from happening again. You work there now, in the same ward, with the same doctor." My blood ran cold. "What doctor?" "Richardson," she spat the name. "Still there after all these years. Still telling mothers their babies were stillborn when they weren't. Still taking them. Dr. Richardson, the senior obstetrician, nearing retirement, respected and beloved. I had worked with him for years, learned from him, trusted him with the delivery of my own daughter." "That's impossible," I said, shaking my head. "Dr. Richardson is a monster," Esther cut in. "And he's not alone. They take the babies of women they think won't fight back, the poor, the very young, those without families. Women who won't be believed." The other figures had moved closer, their faces now visible, each marked by the same grief, the same rage. One of them, a young woman in clothes that looked to be from the 70s, stepped forward. "Check the records," she said, her voice distant like radio static. "The ones they keep in the basement archive. The ones no one looks at anymore. You'll find our names. You'll find our babies, listed as stillborn while they were sold to wealthy families who couldn't have children of their own." My mind reeled. It was insane, impossible. And yet, there had always been whispers about the unusually high stillbirth rate in certain decades. About records that didn't quite add up. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because your daughter is in danger," Esther said simply. My phone rang again, my husband once more. With shaking hands, I answered. "Olivia, something's wrong," he said, panic evident in his voice. "Madison's burning up with fever. I'm taking her to the hospital." "No!" I shouted, sudden terror gripping me. "Not Memorial. Take her anywhere else. Promise me, Jack. Not Memorial. It's the closest. Please," I begged. "I'll explain later. Just not there. I'm on my way home now." I ended the call and looked back at the women, but the playground was empty. The rusted swing moved gently in the night breeze. No sign remained of Esther or the others, not even the bundle of sticks and hospital bracelets. But in the dirt at my feet, someone had scratched a series of numbers, dates spanning 30 years, and beside them, a list of names. With shaking hands, I took a photo with my phone, then turned and ran toward home, the phantom sound of babies crying echoing in my ears. Dawn was breaking by the time I reached our apartment, casting the street in a sickly gray light that did nothing to dispel the horror of the night. Jack had taken Madison to St. Joseph's Hospital across town, following my frantic instructions. They were admitting her for observation, high fever, unusual lethargy, symptoms that had come on suddenly in the night. Instead of joining them immediately, I made a detour that both terrified and compelled me. I had to know if there was any truth to Esther's claims before I lost my mind completely. Memorial Hospital looked different to me now as I swiped my ID card and entered through the staff entrance. The familiar corridors seemed sinister, hiding decades of secrets behind their sterile white walls. My colleagues greeted me with surprise. I wasn't scheduled to work today, but I waved them off with mumbled excuses about forgotten paperwork. The basement archives were rarely visited now that most records had been digitized. Only the oldest files remained here, deemed not worth the effort of scanning. The room required special access, but as a senior nurse, I had been given the code years ago for a research project and never bothered to mention when it changed. The fluorescent lights flickered as I entered, illuminating rows of metal shelving stacked with boxes of paper records. I pulled out my phone and looked at the photo I had taken of the date scratched in the dirt. The earliest was from 1978. It took me nearly an hour of searching before I found the right section. The delivery records were organized by year and month. With trembling hands, I pulled out the first box that matched one of the dates from my photo. June 12, 1978. I flipped through the files until I found the day, then scanned the names of delivering mothers. There she was, Corinne Miller, age 16. Cause of infant death, stillbirth. Attending physician, Dr. Thomas Richardson. My stomach churned as I reached for the next box. April 3, 1984. Alice Wong, age 15. Stillbirth. Dr. Richardson. Box after box, year after year. Different women, different dates, but always the same story. Young, often unmarried, mostly from poor neighborhoods. Many without family present. All allegedly delivering stillborn infants. All attended by Dr. Richardson or one of 3 other doctors who had worked at Memorial over the decades. One of those doctors was now the hospital administrator. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the papers. This wasn't just a few suspicious cases, this was systematic, spanning decades. Dozens of babies declared dead who perhaps weren't. As I replaced the last box, my phone vibrated with a text from Jack. Madison's fever breaking. Doctor says she should be fine. What's going on? Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by renewed determination. I needed more than just these paper records. I needed proof that would stand up to scrutiny. I made my way to the labor and delivery ward, keeping my head down to avoid lengthy conversations. At my workstation, I logged into the hospital system and began searching the electronic records from the past 15 years. The pattern continued. Dr. Richardson's stillbirth rates were significantly higher among certain demographics. Not enough to raise obvious alarms, but unmistakable when specifically looking for it. And there was something else, adoption records handled through a specific agency, often involving couples who had connections to Memorial Hospital, adopting babies with suspicious timing relative to the stillbirths. I was so engrossed in my discovery that I didn't notice someone approaching until a shadow fell across my screen. Working on your day off, Olivia? That's dedication. I flinched, minimizing the window before looking up into the face of Dr. Richardson. He was in his 60s now, silver-haired and grandfatherly, with the easy confidence of a man who had delivered thousands of babies over a distinguished career. Just catching up on some things, I managed to say, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain he could hear it. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Your little girl is sick, I hear. Taken to St. Joseph's rather than coming here. I was surprised. I slid down my spine. How did you know that? This is a hospital, Olivia. People talk. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You look tired. Like you've had a rough night. Wandering around after dark can be dangerous, you know. Patterson Park isn't safe at night. My blood froze. There was no way he could know I had been in the park unless... I should go, I said, standing abruptly. Madison needs me. His hand clamped around my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a man his age. Whatever you think you found in those old records, Olivia, who's going to believe you? A overwrought mother, hallucinating from exhaustion and worry? A nurse having a breakdown? His smile widened. It would be a shame if your mental health concerns affected your fitness as a parent. I pulled my arm free, fury replacing fear. You won't get away with this anymore, I hissed. Those women, they're babies. Those women were given a kindness, he cut in, voice hardening. Unwanted pregnancies, lives that would have been miserable. We found those children good homes, with families who could provide for them properly. It was a service. It was kidnapping, I spat. And murder, in cases where you actually did let the babies die. I backed toward the door. And now there's evidence. Records. Patterns that can't be explained away. Dr. Richardson's face changed, the grandfatherly mask slipping to reveal something cold and calculating. Evidence can disappear, Olivia. Records can be altered. And unstable nurses with histories of postpartum hallucinations aren't credible witnesses. What are you talking about? I never had postpartum. Your medical file might suggest otherwise by tomorrow. He stepped toward me. Be sensible. Go home. Forget this nonsense about old records and adoption conspiracies. Focus on your daughter. On keeping her safe and healthy. The threat was unmistakable. I turned and fled, not stopping until I reached my car. My hands shook so badly I could barely insert the key. As the engine started, my phone rang, an unknown number. Is this Olivia Winters? A woman's voice asked when I answered. Yes, who is this? My name is Detective Melissa Carpenter, Georgia Bureau of Investigation. We're conducting an investigation into adoption irregularities potentially connected to Memorial Hospital. Your access credentials were just used to search specific records we've been monitoring. I think we need to talk. Relief made me dizzy. Yes, I agreed, watching as Dr. Richardson emerged from the hospital entrance, scanning the parking lot. Our eyes met through the windshield. We definitely need to talk. As I pulled away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For just a moment, I thought I saw them standing in the hospital's shadow, Esther and the others, their empty arms finally at rest. But when I blinked, there was nothing there but the morning sun glinting off the hospital windows. In the distance, I thought I heard the faint sound of a baby crying, then silence. I drove towards St. Joseph's Hospital, toward my daughter, leaving Memorial and its ghosts behind. But as I merged onto the highway, the weight of what I discovered settled heavily upon me. Some cries, once heard, can never be unheard. Some ghosts will never rest until justice is done. And some nights in darkened parks will haunt you forever, changing everything you thought you knew about the world. I pressed harder on the accelerator, racing toward Madison, even as I wondered how many mothers never got the chance to hold their crying infants, and how many more might have, if someone had only listened to the cries no one else could hear. Have you ever noticed how different people look in candlelight? How their features shift and dance with the shadows, revealing something usually hidden beneath the harsh glare of electric bulbs? The rain pounded against the windshield as I drove through the narrow streets of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. My wipers struggled against the downpour, each sweep revealing just enough of the road ahead before the water obscured my vision once again. I had moved to this small town only 3 weeks ago, taking a position at the local newspaper that no one else seemed to want. The isolation was getting to me already. No friends, no connections, just endless days at the office and nights alone in my rented apartment. That's why when Daniel, the bartender at the Rusty Nail, mentioned a special gathering happening in the basement of the establishment, I jumped at the chance to attend. "It's not for everyone," he had said, wiping down the counter with a stained rag. "But you seem like you might appreciate it. Friday night, 10 o'clock. Knocked 3 times on the basement door." What I didn't realize was that Daniel's eyes never quite met mine when he spoke, or how his fingers trembled slightly when he handed me the unmarked envelope containing the formal invitation. Little details that should have warned me. I parked my car a block away from the bar, the rain soaking through my jacket as I hurried toward the dim neon sign of the Rusty Nail. The streets were uncommonly quiet for a Friday night, with only the occasional car passing by, its headlights cutting through the darkness before disappearing around a corner. Inside, the bar was busier than I expected. People huddled in small groups, their conversations a low murmur beneath the generic country music playing from outdated speakers. I scanned the room for Daniel, but didn't see him behind the bar. Instead, a woman I didn't recognize was mixing drinks with mechanical efficiency. "Excuse me," I said, approaching the bar. "I'm looking for Daniel." The woman paused, her expression blank. "Daniel's not working tonight." "Oh. Well, I was invited to a gathering." "In the basement?" Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Back hallway, past the restrooms. If you've been invited, you'll know what to do." I thanked her and made my way through the crowd, feeling the weight of unseen gazes on my back. The hallway leading to the restrooms was dimly lit, with a single bulb flickering overhead. Beyond the men's room was a narrow door painted the same color as the wall, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. I knocked 3 times, as instructed. The door opened inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The only illumination came from what appeared to be candlelight flickering at the bottom. A figure stood on the first step, their face obscured by shadow. "Do you seek the true light?" a voice asked, neither distinctly male nor female. I hesitated, then remembered the words from the invitation. "I seek what electric light has hidden." The figure stepped aside. "Descend and leave the false world behind." As I took my first step down, I caught a peculiar scent, beeswax and something else, something chemical and unfamiliar. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I was suddenly aware of how the sound of the bar above had been completely cut off. The silence was absolute except for my footsteps on the wooden stairs. At the bottom, I found myself in a large basement room. The walls were exposed brick, and the floor was concrete. But what struck me most was the lighting, or rather, the deliberate lack of it. Dozens of candles of various sizes were placed around the room, their flames casting long, dancing shadows across the walls and ceiling. There wasn't a single electric light to be seen. About 20 people stood in a loose circle, all facing inward. They wore normal clothes, jeans, sweaters, nothing cult-like or ceremonial. But their stillness was unnerving. None of them spoke or acknowledged my arrival. In the center of the circle was a small table with a single, unusually large black candle. Its flame seemed to burn higher and brighter than the others, with an almost bluish tint at its core. A man stepped forward from the circle. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with a neatly trimmed white beard and piercing eyes that reflected the candlelight. "Welcome," he said, his voice surprisingly warm. "I am Thomas. We are pleased you've joined us." I introduced myself, but I noticed my voice sounded different in this space, flatter, muted. Before we begin, Thomas continued, I must ask, when did you last stand beneath true darkness? The question caught me off guard. I'm not sure what you mean. Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. In this modern world, we are never truly in darkness. Streetlights, phone screens, alarm clocks, even when we sleep, artificial light surrounds us. It blinds us to what truly exists in the spaces between. A murmur of agreement rippled through the circle. Tonight, he said, we offer you a glimpse of what you've been missing. What we've all been missing. The group began to move, rearranging themselves into a tighter circle around the central candle. Someone handed me a small, unlit candle of my own. Light it from the center flame, Thomas instructed. And join us. As I stepped forward, I noticed something odd about the central candle. The flame seemed to move in a way that didn't match the still air of the basement. It twisted and curled as if alive, reaching toward me as I approached. I leaned in to light my candle, and for a brief moment, I swore I saw something moving within the flame, a shape, a face perhaps, gone so quickly I couldn't be certain it was ever there. The wax of my candle was warm against my fingers, almost uncomfortably so. As I joined the circle, I noticed that everyone was staring not at the central candle, but at their own flames with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Now, Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper, we begin the unbinding. The group started to sway gently, a slow, hypnotic movement. Thomas began to speak in a language I didn't recognize, not Latin or any European tongue I was familiar with. The words seemed to slither through the air, viscous and heavy. And then, one by one, the members of the circle began to blow out their candles. With each extinguished flame, the room grew darker, and the central black candle seemed to grow brighter. A pressure began to build in my ears, similar to the feeling of descending in an airplane. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. I became aware of a low humming sound, just at the edge of hearing. Whether it came from the group or somewhere else, I couldn't tell. When only my candle and the central one remained lit, Thomas fixed his gaze on me. In the dancing light, his pupils seemed to expand until his eyes were almost entirely black. Extinguish your light, he commanded, and see what has always been waiting. Something in his tone made me hesitate. The room suddenly felt colder, and I could have sworn I saw movement in the corners of my vision, quick, darting shapes that disappeared when I tried to focus on them. I'm not sure about this, I stammered. Thomas's expression hardened. You were invited because we sensed you could understand. Don't disappoint us now. The pressure from the group was palpable. 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me, waiting, expectant. I lifted my candle closer to my face, ready to blow it out. But just before I did, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the reflection of their eyes, illuminated by the candlelight, I saw not my own image, but something else, something that moved independently, something that wasn't me. I lowered the candle, a chill running down my spine. What exactly happens during the unbinding? Thomas's smile returned, but there was nothing warm about it now. We release ourselves from the illusion of the modern world. We see what electric light has hidden from humanity for over a century. We reconnect with what has always been watching from the darkness. As he spoke, I became aware of a faint buzzing sound coming from my pocket, my phone vibrating with a call or message. The noise seemed to agitate the group. Several members flinched as if in pain. Thomas's eyes narrowed. You brought electric technology down here? It's just my phone, I said, reaching for it instinctively. No! Thomas barked, his voice suddenly thunderous in the confined space. No electric light. But it was too late. As I pulled out my phone, the screen illuminated, casting a harsh blue glow across the basement. The reaction was immediate and disturbing. Several members of the circle cried out, raising their hands to shield their eyes as if the relatively dim light of my phone was blinding. Others backed away, their faces contorted in what looked like physical pain. And the central candle, the large black one, its flame surged upward with a whoosh, nearly reaching the ceiling before collapsing back down to its original size. In that brief surge of light, I saw something that made my heart stop. The shadows cast by the group didn't match their bodies. They stretched and twisted in impossible ways, some seeming to reach toward me with elongated limbs that their human owners didn't possess. Thomas recovered first, his face a mask of cold fury. "You weren't ready," he said, his voice now devoid of any warmth. "Leave us. Now." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and rushed toward the stairs, my phone still clutched in my hand, its screen providing just enough light to guide my way. Behind me, I heard Thomas begin chanting again, his voice rising in intensity. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I glanced back one last time. The group had reformed their circle, tighter than before. The central candle's flame had changed color completely, no longer yellow or even blue, but a deep, unnatural purple that seemed to drink in the darkness rather than illuminate it. And in its light, just for a moment, I saw their faces change, features shifting, mouths stretching too wide, eyes sinking deeper into their sockets. I scrambled up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the top, I found the door was locked. I pounded on it, frantic, calling for help. The chanting below grew louder, and I could feel vibrations coming through the wooden steps beneath my feet. Just as panic threatened to overwhelm me, the door swung open. The woman from the bar stood there, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have brought light," she said simply, then stepped aside to let me pass. I pushed past her and practically ran through the bar, ignoring the curious glances from the patrons. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and shiny under the streetlights. I had never been so grateful for those artificial lights in my life. As I drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen in the candlelight, the distorted shadows, the changed faces, the way the flame seemed to move with purpose and awareness. That night, I slept with every light in my apartment turned on. And still, in my dreams, I heard Thomas's voice. We reconnect with what has always been watching from the darkness. When I woke the next morning, I found a small pool of wax on my bedside table. Black wax, though I have no black candles. And when I looked in the mirror, I noticed something else, something that made my stomach lurch. My eyes, which had always been hazel, now had the faintest ring of purple around the pupils. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, the electric light that now seemed too harsh, too revealing, too false. I couldn't stop thinking about that night in the basement of the Rusty Nail. 3 days had passed, and I'd thrown myself into work at the newspaper, taking on extra assignments to keep my mind occupied. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that strange purple flame and the distorted shadows of the candlelight group. The ring of purple around my pupils hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown more pronounced. I tried to convince myself it was just stress or lack of sleep, but deep down, I knew better. Something had changed in me that night. The worst part was the electricity. Every time I turned on a light, I felt a sharp pain behind my eyes. My laptop screen gave me splitting headaches after just minutes of use. Even the gentle hum of my refrigerator had become an irritating buzz that set my teeth on edge. I was sitting at my desk at the Oak Ridge Chronicle, trying to focus on editing a piece about local farming subsidies when the overhead fluorescent lights flickered. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I had to grip the edge of my desk to steady myself. "You okay, Jackson?" My editor, Marlene, was watching me with concern. "You look like hell." "Just a migraine," I lied, shielding my eyes from the harsh office lighting. "I might need to take off early." Marlene frowned. "This is the third time this week. Maybe you should see a doctor." I nodded, but I knew no doctor would be able to explain what was happening to me. What would I say? That I'd attended a candlelit gathering in a bar basement and now electric lights were causing me physical pain? That I was seeing impossible shadows and my eyes were changing color? "I'll be fine," I insisted, gathering my things. "I just need some rest." Outside, the late afternoon sun was mercifully hidden behind thick clouds. I drove home with my sunglasses on, despite the overcast day. Every street light I passed seemed to pulse with an unnatural intensity, sending spikes of pain through my skull. When I reached my apartment, I found a small package leaning against my door. No postmark, no return address, just my name written in an elegant, flowing script. I brought it inside and set it on my kitchen counter, staring at it with a mixture of curiosity and dread. After several minutes of deliberation, I carefully opened it. Inside was a single black candle, identical to the one that had been at the center of the circle in the basement. A small note accompanied it. "When you're ready to see, light this in total darkness. You've already begun the transition. T. T for Thomas," I presumed. I dropped the note as if it had burned me, backing away from the counter. The candle seemed to absorb the light around it, its matte black surface revealing no reflections. "No," I said aloud to my empty apartment. "No way." I snatched up the candle and threw it in the trash, then tied up the bag and took it immediately to the dumpster behind my building. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was done with this, whatever this was. That night, I fell asleep with every light in my apartment blazing, despite the discomfort it caused me. But sometime during the night, the power went out. I woke to absolute darkness, the kind that feels tangible, like a weight pressing down on your chest. The familiar hum of electricity was gone, replaced by a silence so complete it rang in my ears. And then I realized I wasn't alone. There was breathing in the darkness. Not my own, but something else's, something that took long, rattling breaths with an odd, wet quality to them. I lay perfectly still, fear paralyzing me. The breathing seemed to move around my bedroom, circling my bed. I could feel the presence getting closer, the air growing colder wherever it moved. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone on the nightstand, but it wasn't there. Instead, my hand closed around something else, something cylindrical and waxy. The black candle. I recoiled, but as I did, I heard a whisper from the darkness, so close it could have been right next to my ear. "Light it." The voice wasn't Thomas's. It wasn't human at all. It had a strange, multi-tone quality, as if several voices were speaking in unison, slightly out of sync with each other. "Light it," the voice repeated, "and you'll see us as we truly are." My hand found my lighter. I'd taken up smoking again in the days since the basement incident, my nerves too frayed to resist the old habit. With shaking hands, I flicked the lighter. The small flame illuminated a tiny circle around my bed, but the darkness beyond seemed even deeper by contrast. The candle, the voice insisted. Not that artificial fire. Despite every instinct screaming at me to run, I found myself lifting the black candle to the lighter's flame. As soon as it caught, the lighter went out, as if snuffed by an invisible hand. The candle's flame was that same unnatural purple I remembered from the basement. It cast no warmth, but it did illuminate the room, though what I saw made me wish for darkness again. My bedroom was filled with figures. Not people, not exactly. They had humanoid shapes, but their proportions were wrong, limbs too long, torsos too thin, necks that bent at impossible angles. They were composed of what looked like living shadow, their edges constantly shifting and flowing. Where their faces should have been were only vague suggestions of features, except for their eyes, brilliant purple orbs that matched the candle's flame. They stood perfectly still, watching me. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare back at them, the black candle trembling in my grip. "We've always been here," the multi-voice whisper came again, though none of the figures seemed to be speaking. "In the corners of your vision. In the shadows you dismiss. In the darkness you fear. What are you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely audible. "We are what came before. Before your kind harnessed lightning and banished us to the edges of your world. We are what waits in true darkness." One of the figures moved closer to my bed, its movement fluid yet somehow wrong, like watching film played at the wrong speed. It extended what might have been an arm, reaching toward me. "The transition has begun in you," it said. "We can smell it." The candlelight opened the way. I flinched away from its touch, nearly dropping the candle in the process. "Stay back. I don't want this. I don't want to transition into whatever you are." A sound filled the room, a dry, rustling noise that I realized with horror was their version of laughter. "It's already happening. Look at your hands." I glanced down at my free hand and felt my heart stop. In the purple light, my skin appeared almost translucent, and beneath it, I could see shadows moving, flowing like ink through my veins. "No," I whispered, horror washing over me. "This isn't real. This can't be real." "Reality is a matter of perspective," the figure said, still reaching for me. "And your perspective is changing. Soon, you'll see only by candlelight. Soon, you'll join us in the spaces between." The candle's flame suddenly flared higher, and in its expanded light, I saw more of the shadow figures crowding my room, some clinging to the walls and ceiling like insects, others falling across the floor like living pools of darkness. In desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I used the candle to light the edge of my bedsheet. The cotton caught quickly, flames spreading across the fabric. The effect on the shadow figures was immediate. They recoiled from the growing fire, their forms seeming to thin and stretch as they backed away. The multi-voice whisper rose to a shriek of anger and pain. I stumbled out of bed, still clutching the black candle, and backed toward my bedroom door. The fire was spreading faster than I anticipated, catching on the curtains and beginning to lick at the wooden bed frame. The shadow figures were retreating from the flames, but I could feel their rage, a palpable force in the air. The one that had reached for me suddenly lunged, its form stretching across the room like a bolt of black lightning. I felt cold fingers close around my wrist, the one holding the candle. The touch was like ice, numbing my skin instantly. I tried to pull away, but its grip was unyielding. "You belong to the darkness now," it hissed, its featureless face inches from mine. "You've been marked. You've been changed." With my free hand, I grabbed my metal desk lamp and swung it with all my strength. It passed through the figure's head with no resistance, but the cord yanked free from the wall, sending sparks flying. The brief flash of electrical discharge seemed to disrupt the shadow figure. Its form wavered, becoming momentarily transparent, and its grip on my wrist loosened. I seized the opportunity and ran, fleeing my bedroom as smoke began to fill the apartment. Behind me, I heard the multi-voice shriek rising in pitch and intensity. I made it to the hallway outside my apartment just as the fire alarm began to blare. The sudden noise and flashing emergency lights sent daggers of pain through my head, but I kept moving, stumbling toward the stairs. As I reached the stairwell, I realized I was still holding the black candle, its purple flame burning steadily despite my flight. I tried to drop it, but my fingers wouldn't release it. It was as if the wax had melted into my skin, becoming part of me. Outside, residents of the apartment building were gathering in the parking lot, staring up at the smoke now billowing from my window. Someone had called the fire department. I could hear sirens in the distance. I retreated to the shadows at the edge of the property, away from the gathering crowd and the harsh emergency lights. My head was pounding, and I could feel something moving beneath my skin, those same ink-like shadows I'd seen in my veins earlier. "Hey, are you all right?" A voice called out to me. One of my neighbors, a young woman named Rebecca, was approaching, concern etched on her face. "You're from apartment 412, right? What happened?" I stepped further back into the shadows, clutching my wrist with the candle behind my back. "Stay away," I warned, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears, deeper, with that same multi-tone quality I'd heard in my bedroom. Rebecca stopped, her expression shifting from concern to fear. "Your eyes," she whispered. "What's wrong with your eyes?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and ran, fleeing into the wooded area behind the apartment complex. The night enveloped me, but I found I could see perfectly in the darkness now, better than I ever could with electric light. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. Finally, I collapsed at the base of a large oak tree, deep in the woods where no artificial light could reach me. The black candle was still clutched in my hand, its purple flame unwavering. I stared at it, watching how the shadows it cast seemed to move independently of the flame's flicker. "What's happening to me?" I asked the darkness, not expecting an answer. But the darkness replied, the multi-voice whisper surrounding me like a cold embrace. "You're becoming what you were always meant to be. A bridge between worlds. Our emissary to the light." I closed my eyes, but it made no difference. I could still see them, the shadow figures, gathering around me in a circle much like the one in the basement of the Rusty Nail. Their purple eyes watched me with what I could only describe as hunger. "I don't want this," I said, though my resistance felt weaker now, more like a formality than a genuine protest. "But you saw us out," the darkness replied. "You knocked on the door. You entered the circle. You lit the candle." "I was just curious," I whispered. "I was lonely. I wanted to belong somewhere." "And now you do," the darkness said, almost gently. "With us." I looked down at my arms and saw the shadows moving freely beneath my skin now, no longer contained in my veins but spreading throughout my body. The pain from electric light seemed a distant memory. Out here, in the true darkness, I felt stronger, more alive than I had in days. A terrible thought occurred to me. What if they were right? What if this was what I was meant to be? The black candle's flame suddenly flared higher, illuminating more of the woods around me. In its purple light, I saw more shadow figures moving among the trees, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. And among them, walking with that same fluid, raw movement, was a familiar figure, Thomas, the man from the basement. Except he wasn't fully human anymore. His form wavered between solid and shadow, his eyes now completely purple without whites or pupils. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying that same multi-tone quality, "to the true world." As he approached, I saw others behind him, human figures in various stages of transformation. Some still looked mostly normal, except for their eyes. Others were more like Thomas, partially consumed by living shadow. And some were almost entirely shadow creatures, with only the faintest suggestion of their former human shapes. I recognized some of them from the circle in the basement. The woman who had let me out. Daniel, the bartender who had first invited me. They all watched me with those same hungry purple eyes. "The transition is different for everyone," Thomas explained, crouching down beside me. "For some, it takes weeks. For others, days. You're progressing remarkably quickly." I wanted to run, to scream, to fight, but my body no longer seemed entirely my own. The shadows beneath my skin had reached my chest, and I could feel them wrapping around my heart, squeezing gently. "Why me?" I asked, the words coming out in that strange, multi-tone voice that was becoming mine. Thomas smiled, his teeth visible through his increasingly transparent face. "We choose carefully. Those who feel disconnected from the modern world. Those who sense there's something more, something hidden. You were perfect, new to town, isolated, searching for connection. What happens now?" "Now," Thomas said, "you help us find more bridges. More emissaries. The electric light has pushed us back for too long. It's time for the darkness to reclaim its place." As if on cue, the distant sirens of the fire trucks at my apartment complex fell silent. A moment later, all the lights in the town beyond the woods went out, a blackout spreading across Oak Ridge. The shadow figures around us stirred excitedly, their forms becoming more solid, more present as the artificial light vanished. "Perfect timing," Thomas said with satisfaction. "The others have done their work well." "Others?" "Your apartment fire was a distraction. The real target was the power station." He gestured to the now darkened town. "Oak Ridge will be without power for days. Long enough for us to complete quite a few transitions." Horror washed over me as I understood the implications. "You're going to take the whole town?" Thomas's smile widened, his face now barely human. "Eventually. But tonight, we focus on those who are ready. Those who will welcome the darkness when it comes knocking." He extended his hand to me, a hand that was now more shadow than flesh. "Are you ready to help us knock?" I looked down at the black candle in my hand, its purple flame now the only light in the darkness. I thought about my life before coming to Oak Ridge, the loneliness, the disconnection, the feeling that I was somehow apart from the world around me. And I thought about what I was becoming, a creature of shadow and candlelight, a bridge between worlds. The shadows beneath my skin reached my throat, and I felt my voice changing, deepening, multiplying as I gave my answer. "I'm ready." As I took Thomas's hand, the purple flame of my candle surged higher, casting our shadows across the forest floor, shadows that moved of their own accord, reaching out to touch the darkness that had always been waiting. 3 nights had passed since the power outage began in Oak Ridge. 3 nights of darkness and transformation. The authorities claimed it was vandalism at the power station, that crews were working around the clock to restore electricity. They estimated another 48 hours before power would return. They had no idea what was truly happening in their town. I moved through the pre-dawn streets, my body now more shadow than substance. The black candle had become a permanent extension of my hand, its purple flame illuminating my path through the darkness. I no longer needed sleep, or perhaps I was in a perpetual dream state now. The line between waking and sleeping as blurred as the line between my body and the shadows that composed it. Thomas had assigned me my first task as an emissary, to bring Eleanor Wright to tonight's gathering. Eleanor was a librarian at the Oak Ridge Public Library, a quiet woman who spent her days surrounded by books and her nights alone in her small cottage at the edge of town. According to Thomas, she was already sensitive to the spaces between, she just didn't know it yet. I found her home easily enough, a quaint stone cottage with a sloped roof and a garden that surrounded it like a protective barrier. In the darkness, I could see candles burning in her windows, not electric lights or battery-powered lanterns like most residents were using during the outage, but real candles. A good sign. I approached her front door, trying to remember how humans did this. Did I knock? Did I still have solid enough hands for that? I raised my free hand, the one not fused with the black candle, and was relieved to see it appeared mostly normal in the purple light, though shadows still moved beneath the skin. I knocked 3 times, just as I on the basement door of the Rusty Nail what felt like a lifetime ago. After a moment, I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened just a crack, and Eleanor peered out, her face illuminated by the candle she held. She was in her early 40s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses that reflected the candlelight. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious but not fearful. I had practiced what to say, how to appear as human as possible. "Miss Wright? I'm sorry to disturb you so early, but I was told you might have a book I've been looking for. On the history of Oak Ridge?" Her expression softened slightly. "The library's closed due to the power outage. You'll have to come back when—" "I know," I interrupted, careful to modulate my voice to hide its multi-tone quality. "But this is urgent. For a story I'm writing for the Chronicle. I was told you had a personal copy of Oak Ridge, Shadows of the Past. This was a real book, a local history that Thomas had told me Eleanor had indeed written her master's thesis on. The mention of it caught her attention. "You're a reporter?" she asked, opening the door a little wider. I nodded, keeping my candle partially concealed behind my back. "Jackson Miller. I'm new in town." She studied me for a moment, then sighed. "It's an unusual time for research, but I suppose. Come in, but please be quick." I was about to have my morning tea. She stepped back, allowing me to enter. The interior of the cottage was exactly as I had imagined it, bookshelves lining every wall, comfortable but worn furniture, and candles. Dozens of them, in various stages of burning, placed strategically around the room to provide maximum light. "You seem well prepared for the power outage," I commented, following her into what appeared to be a study. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I've always preferred candlelight for reading. Electric light is too harsh, too revealing. It leaves no room for imagination." I felt a surge of excitement at her words. She was indeed ready. "I know exactly what you mean," I said, allowing a hint of my true voice to slip through. "Electric light blinds us to what exists in the spaces between." Eleanor froze, her hand halfway to a bookshelf. She turned slowly to face me, her expression suddenly wary. "That's an unusual way to put it. Who did you say sent you?" I stepped closer, deliberately letting my candle become visible. Its purple flame cast strange shadows across the room, shadows that moved independently of their sources. "No one sent me, Eleanor. I found you myself." I can sense those who belong in the darkness. Her eyes widened as she caught sight of my candle, then narrowed as she studied my face. Your eyes, she whispered. They're purple. Yes, I confirmed, moving closer still. A sign of the transition. To my surprise, Eleanor didn't back away. Instead, she leaned forward, examining me with what appeared to be academic curiosity rather than fear. Transition to what? She asked. I hesitated, unsure how to explain. Instead, I held up my free hand and allowed the shadows beneath my skin to move more freely, rippling across my surface like ink in water. Eleanor gasped, but still didn't retreat. Fascinating, she breathed. I've read about this, but I never thought. She trailed off, then looked me directly in the eyes. You're one of them, aren't you? The Umbra. It was my turn to be surprised. The what? The Umbra. The Shadow People. I found references to them in old journals while researching my thesis. They supposedly existed in Oak Ridge since its founding, living alongside humans but only visible in candlelight. She gestured to the many candles around her home. I've been trying to see them for years. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. This was not how I had expected this conversation to go. You've been looking for us? Eleanor nodded eagerly. Ever since I found the journals of Martha Oak Ridge, the founder's wife. She wrote about entities that existed in the shadows, visible only by candlelight. She claimed they were ancient beings who had lived in this valley long before humans arrived. She paused, studying me. But you weren't always one of them, were you? You said something about a transition. I found myself caught between my mission and a strange desire to confide in this woman who seemed to understand more than she should. I was human, yes. Until recently. I attended a gathering at the Rusty Nail, in the basement. They changed me. Eleanor's eyes lit up. The Candlelight Club. I've heard rumors about them for years, but I could never find their meeting place. She set down her candle and moved to a desk in the corner, pulling out a leather-bound journal. I've been documenting everything I could find about the Umbra and their human allies. She flipped through the pages, revealing meticulously detailed notes and sketches, some of shadow figures that looked remarkably like the creatures I had seen in my bedroom, others of human faces with purple eyes. This is incredible, I said, genuinely amazed. You understand more than most initiates. Eleanor looked up, her expression suddenly serious. What's happening now? With the power outage? It's them, isn't it? I nodded slowly. The darkness gives us strength. The longer the town remains without electric light, the more we can manifest, the more transitions we can complete. And what happens when the power comes back on? I hesitated. Thomas hadn't shared all the details of the plan with me yet, but I knew enough. It won't. Not if we succeed tonight. Eleanor's excitement dimmed slightly. What do you mean? There's a gathering tonight. A ritual. If enough of us are present, we can make the darkness permanent. At least in Oak Ridge. She closed her journal, her expression thoughtful. And why are you telling me this? Why come to me? Because you're meant to join us, I said, stepping closer. You already belong to the shadows more than you realize. Thomas sensed it. That's why he sent me to bring you to the gathering. Thomas? Eleanor's voice sharpened. Thomas Green? I nodded, surprised she knew his name. Yes. He leads the Candlelight Club. Eleanor's demeanor changed suddenly, her academic curiosity replaced by something colder, more calculating. I see. And this gathering, where is it to be held? The old Oak Ridge Mill, by the river, I replied. At midnight. Will you come? She seemed to consider for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yes. I've waited years for this opportunity. Of course I'll come. Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling aside. I had succeeded in my mission, that was all that mattered. I'll come for you at 11, I said, moving toward the door. Be ready. And bring only candles, no electric lights, no batteries. Nothing that would harm the Umbra. Eleanor followed me to the door. One more question, if I may. This transition, is it painful? I thought about the shadows moving beneath my skin, the way my body was becoming less substantial each day, the strange hunger that gnawed at me constantly now, not for food, but for darkness itself. It's disorienting, I admitted. But once you accept it, there's a kind of freedom in becoming shadow. She nodded, as if making a mental note. I'll be ready at 11. As I stepped back into the pre-dawn darkness, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and unease. Eleanor had been far too ready, too knowledgeable. Thomas would be pleased, but something about her reaction didn't sit right with me. I pushed the thought away and merged with the shadows, moving through the sleeping town toward the abandoned mill where preparations for the night's ritual were already underway. The Oak Ridge Mill had been closed for decades, its massive water wheel long since rotted away, its stone walls crumbling in places. But its location, built directly over the river, isolated from the town by a thick stand of trees, made it ideal for our purposes. As I approached, I could see dozens of candles illuminating the interior, their flames visible through the broken windows. Shadow figures moved about, some fully transformed like Thomas, others still in various stages of transition like myself. I passed through a gap in the wall rather than using the door, my body now insubstantial enough to flow through narrow spaces. Inside, the main floor of the mill had been cleared of debris, and a large circle of black candles had been arranged in the center. Thomas stood in the middle of the circle, his form now almost entirely shadow except for his eyes, which glowed with that same purple light. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable on his barely there face. "You've seen her?" he asked, his multi-tone voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Yes," I replied. "She'll come tonight." "And she's receptive?" I hesitated. "She's knowledgeable. More than I expected. She called us the Umbra. She knew about the Candlelight Club." Thomas went very still. "What else did she know?" "She mentioned Martha Oak Ridge's journals. She said she's been researching the Umbra for years." A ripple passed through Thomas's shadow form, what might have been the equivalent of a shudder. "Eleanor Wright," he murmured. "I should have made the connection sooner." "What connection?" "Martha Oak Ridge's journals were thought lost for generations. They resurfaced 10 years ago, discovered in the attic of the Wright family home." Thomas moved closer to me, his voice lowering. "Eleanor Wright is Martha Oak Ridge's direct descendant." A chill ran through me. "Is that important?" "It could be," Thomas replied. "The Oak Ridge bloodline has always been resistant to our influence. It's why we've never been able to fully claim this town, despite centuries of trying. Should I not have invited her?" Thomas was silent for a moment, then shook his head. "No, you did right. Better to have her here, where we can watch her, than working against us from the shadows. Besides, bloodline or not, no single human can stop what we've set in motion. He gestured around the mill, where dozens of shadow figures and half-transformed humans were working. Some were arranging more black candles in intricate patterns across the floor. Others were carving strange symbols into the stone walls. Tonight, we complete the ritual that the first Umbra began centuries ago, Thomas explained. When the town is fully in darkness, when enough humans have begun the transition, we'll open the gate permanently. The veil won't just be thin, it will be torn away completely. And then darkness returns to its rightful place. The electric light that has pushed us back for over a century will be extinguished. Oak Ridge will be ours again, as it was meant to be. And from here, we'll spread. His voice took on fervent quality. Town by town, city by city, until the whole world returns to candlelight. The scale of his ambition shocked me. The whole world? Is that even possible? Thomas's form rippled again, this time with what seemed like amusement. One step at a time, my young shadow. First Oak Ridge, then the county, then the state. The world will follow, in time. He turned away, returning to the center of the candle circle. Rest now. Gather your strength. Tonight will require everything from all of us. I found a dark corner of the mill and settled into it, allowing my form to blend with the shadows there. As I watched the preparations continue, I found myself thinking about Eleanor Wright and the strange hunger in her eyes when she spoke of the Umbra. Not fear, not even the academic curiosity she had first displayed, but something else, something that looked almost like vengeance. As the day wore on, more shadow figures and transitioning humans arrived at the mill. Some I recognized from the original gathering at the Rusty Nail, Daniel the bartender, now almost fully shadow, the woman who had opened the door for me that night, her transformation less advanced but progressing steadily. Others were new to me, townspeople who had been visited in the darkness, who had lit black candles and begun their own transitions. By noon, there were over 50 of us gathered in the mill, and Thomas predicted we would number over 100 by midnight. I drifted in and out of awareness, sometimes merging so completely with the shadows that I lost track of where my body ended and the darkness began. It was a strange sensation, but not unpleasant, like floating in warm water, boundaries dissolving. As the sun began to set, I felt a surge of energy. The Umbra were strongest at night, drawing power from true darkness. Around me, the other shadow figures were becoming more solid, more present. Thomas called us together as twilight deepened outside. The time approaches, he announced, his voice carrying easily through the mill. Soon, we will welcome more converts to our ranks. Each of you has been assigned someone to bring to the gathering. Go now, and return with them by midnight. I remembered my promise to collect Eleanor at 11. As the others dispersed, flowing out into the growing darkness of the town, I approached Thomas. What if she resists? I asked. What if she's changed her mind? Thomas's purple eyes fixed on me. Then you will bring her anyway. Willing or not, she must be present for the ritual. The Oak Ridge bloodline must be represented. I nodded, though his words troubled me. And once she's here, once the ritual begins, she'll have no choice but to join us. The darkness will claim her, as it has claimed all of us. With that, he turned away, returning to the complex symbols he was creating in the center of the candle circle. I left the mill, moving through the shadows of Oak Ridge toward Eleanor's cottage. The town was eerily quiet, the fourth night of the power outage having driven most residents indoors. Those few who were out carried flashlights or lanterns, their beams cutting through the darkness ineffectually, unable to penetrate the deeper shadows where the umbra moved freely. As I approached Eleanor's cottage, I noticed something odd. There were no candles visible in the windows. Had she gone out? Changed her mind about meeting me? I reached the front door and knocked 3 times, just as I had that morning. No response came. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I tried the door and found it unlocked. Pushing it open, I called out, "Eleanor?" "It's Jackson. I've come to take you to the gathering." The cottage was dark and silent. I lifted my black candle higher, its purple flame illuminating the interior. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, bookshelves lining the walls, comfortable furniture, candles placed around the room. But the candles were unlit, and there was no sign of Eleanor. I moved deeper into the cottage, checking each room. The kitchen was empty, as was the study. Her bedroom door was closed. I knocked once, then opened it when no answer came. The room was empty, the bed neatly made. But on the bedside table, I found a note addressed to me. "Jackson, I'm sorry I couldn't wait for you. I've gone to the mill early. There are things I need to prepare before the ritual begins. I'll see you there. Eleanor." I frowned, reading the note again. How did she know exactly where the gathering would be? I had told her it was at the old mill, yes, but I hadn't given specific directions. And what preparations could she possibly need to make? A sense of unease washed over me. Something wasn't right. I left the cottage quickly, flowing through the shadows back toward the mill with greater urgency than before. As I neared the abandoned building, I noticed something that made my shadow heart grow cold, flickers of light around the perimeter, but not the warm glow of candles. These were harsher, more directed beams. Flashlights. I approached cautiously, keeping to the deepest shadows. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. A dozen figures crouched in the underbrush surrounding the mill, all carrying powerful flashlights and what looked like equipment of some kind. And at their center, giving quiet instructions, was Eleanor Wright. I moved closer, staying just beyond the reach of their lights, straining to hear what she was saying. "Wait for my signal. When the ritual reaches its peak, that's when we hit them with everything we've got. Full spectrum LEDs, UV, halogen, all of it. The stronger the light, the more it disrupts their forms." "And you're sure this will work?" one of the figures asked. "These things have killed 3 people already." Eleanor's voice was grim. "It will work. My family has been fighting the Umbra for generations. Light is their weakness, always has been. That's why they hate electricity so much. It doesn't just push them back, it can destroy them completely if it's strong enough." I retreated, horror washing over me. Eleanor hadn't been researching the Umbra out of academic curiosity or a desire to join them. She had been studying her enemy, preparing for this moment. And I had let her write to us. I had to warn Thomas. I flowed through the shadows back to the mill, slipping inside through a crack in the wall. The preparations for the ritual were nearly complete. The candle circle now expanded to encompass most of the main floor. Shadow figures and transitioning humans moved about, arranging the final elements. I found Thomas in what had once been the mill manager's office, consulting an ancient-looking book bound in black and leather. "Thomas," I gasped, my voice urgent. "Eleanor Wright, she's here, but she's not alone. She's brought others, with lights, powerful lights. They're planning to attack during the ritual." Thomas looked up slowly, his purple eyes fixing on me. "I know. His calm response caught me off guard. You know? Then we have to stop the ritual, get everyone out before. No, Thomas interrupted, his voice eerily calm. The ritual will proceed as planned. But she'll kill us all. She said light can destroy us completely. Not all light, Thomas said, closing the book carefully. Only certain kinds. And not tonight. He moved closer to me, his shadow form rippling. Tonight, we are stronger than we've ever been. The veil is already tearing. Can't you feel it? And I could. There was a tension in the air, a pressure that made it feel like reality itself was stretched thin, ready to snap. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper, more alive than ever before. But Eleanor Wright is exactly where she needs to be, Thomas said, his voice taking on that multi-tone quality that made it sound like many voices speaking at once. Her presence here tonight is no accident. No coincidence. It was always meant to be this way. What do you mean? I asked, confusion and fear mingling within me. The ritual requires a sacrifice, Thomas explained, his voice dropping to a whisper. A willing sacrifice would be ideal, but an unwilling one will suffice. And who better than a descendant of Martha Oakridge herself? The bloodline that has kept us contained for generations will now be the key to our freedom. Horror washed over me. You're going to kill her? Not kill, Thomas corrected. Transform. Consume. Her essence will power the final stage of the ritual, tearing the veil permanently. He placed a shadowy hand on my shoulder. And you, my young shadow, will be the one to bring her to the circle. I backed away, shaking my head. No. I won't do it. This isn't what I agreed to. You agreed to serve the darkness, Thomas reminded me, his voice hardening. You agreed to help us reclaim what was taken from us. Did you think that would come without cost? But she's innocent. She's just trying to protect her town. Innocent? Thomas laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. The Oakridge family has hunted and destroyed our kind for centuries. They built this town on our suffering, used their knowledge to push us back into the shadows. There is nothing innocent about her or her bloodline. He moved closer, his form growing larger, more imposing. You will do as you're told, emissary. Or you will discover that the transition can be reversed painfully. To demonstrate his point, he reached out and touched my chest with one shadow finger. Instantly, a burning pain spread through me, as if my very essence was being torn apart. I cried out, collapsing to my knees. The choice is yours, Thomas said, withdrawing his touch. Bring Eleanor Wright to the circle by midnight, or join her in her fate. He left me there, gasping and trembling. The pain subsided slowly, leaving me weak and disoriented. I knew then that I had made a terrible mistake in joining the Candlelight Club. What I had seen as connection, as belonging, was something far darker and more malevolent than I had realized. But what choice did I have now? I was no longer human, the transition had progressed too far. I couldn't simply walk away. And if I warned Eleanor, Thomas would know. He would destroy me, and then capture her anyway. As midnight approached, I huddled in the shadows of the mill, watching as more and more shadow figures and transitioning humans arrived for the ritual. The candle circle was now complete, hundreds of black candles arranged in intricate patterns across the floor, their purple flames casting an eerie light that seemed to bend and twist in impossible ways. And outside, Eleanor and her group were waiting, their lights ready to strike at the heart of the ritual. I was caught between two worlds, no longer human, but not fully shadow either. And as the clock ticked closer to midnight, I knew I would have to choose a side. The fate of Oak Ridge, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance. Midnight approached with agonizing slowness. The mill was now filled with over 100 shadow figures and transitioning humans, all gathered around the elaborate candle circle where Thomas stood, his form now entirely shadow except for his brilliant purple eyes. The black leather book lay open before him, its pages covered in symbols that seemed to shift and move when viewed directly. I remained hidden in the darkest corner of the mill, torn between my loyalty to the Umbra, forced though it might be, and my horror at what they planned for Eleanor. Outside, I knew she and her group were waiting, their lights prepared to strike at what they believed was the moment of greatest vulnerability. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. As the ancient clock in the mill tower struck the first chime of midnight, Thomas raised his arms. "Brothers and sisters of the shadow," he called, his multi-tone voice reverberating through the cavernous space. "The time has come to reclaim what was taken from us. To tear the veil forever and let darkness reign once more." A chorus of whispers rose from the gathered shadows, a sound like wind through dead leaves. The purple flames of the black candles surged higher, casting writhing shadows across the walls. "For too long, we have been pushed back by the harsh glare of electric light," Thomas continued. "Confined to the edges of this world, the spaces between. But tonight, we end our exile. Tonight, we bring the Age of Shadow back to this realm." The whispers grew louder, more excited. I could feel the energy building in the room, a palpable force that made the air thick and heavy. "But to complete our ritual," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper that nonetheless carried to every corner of the mill, "we need one final element. One last sacrifice." He turned slowly, his purple eyes fixing on me in my hidden corner. "Bring her to us, emissary. Fulfill your purpose." All eyes turned to me, dozens of purple gazes pinning me in place. I knew I had no choice. If I refused, Thomas would destroy me and send another to capture Eleanor. At least if I went myself, I might have a chance to warn her. I pushed myself away from the wall, my form flowing more than walking toward the main entrance of the mill. As I passed Thomas, he reached out and touched my shoulder, his shadow fingers cold against my increasingly insubstantial skin. "Do not fail us," he whispered, for my ears alone. "Remember what you are becoming." I nodded wordlessly and continued toward the door. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a physical blow. The darkness beyond the mill was thick and welcoming, but I could sense the threat hidden within it, Eleanor and her group, waiting with their weapons of light. I moved carefully through the shadows, extending my senses to locate them. They were scattered around the mill, positioned strategically to cover all exits. Eleanor herself was crouched behind a fallen tree about 50 yards from the main entrance, a large flashlight in her hands and what looked like a backpack full of equipment beside her. I approached from behind, moving silently through the darkness. When I was just a few feet away, I whispered, "Eleanor." She whirled around, the flashlight coming up instinctively. I flinched back, raising my hand to shield my eyes, but she didn't turn it on. "Jackson," she hissed, squinting into the darkness. "Is that you?" "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice low. "Listen to me. You need to leave. Now. All of you. It's a trap." Eleanor's expression hardened. "What are you talking about?" "Thomas knows you're here. He's been expecting you. The ritual, it's not what you think. They need a sacrifice to complete it. You, specifically. An Oak Ridge. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with suspicion. And why are you telling me this? You're one of them now. I shook my head, the movement feeling strange in my increasingly shadowy form. Not by choice. Not anymore. I didn't know what they really were when I joined them. What they really want. And what do they want? To turn the world back to darkness. To let the Umbra rule again, as they claimed they did before electricity pushed them back. Eleanor studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. How do I know this isn't another trick? Another way to lure me in? You don't, I admitted. But think about it, if I wanted to capture you, I could have done it already. You didn't even hear me approach. She glanced around, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. What about the others? My team? They're in danger too. Thomas will send others for them once he realizes I've failed to bring you in. Eleanor cursed under her breath, then reached for a radio clipped to her belt. Everyone fall back, she whispered into it. Regroup at point C, possible ambush scenario. Static crackle for a moment, then a voice responded, copy that. Falling back. She turned back to me. If what you're saying is true, we need to stop this ritual. Not just retreat. Ow! There are over 100 of them in there, and they're growing stronger by the minute. The veil is already thinning, I can feel it. Eleanor reached into her backpack and pulled out what looked like a modified flare gun. This is packed with magnesium and phosphorus. Burns hotter and brighter than anything you've ever seen. One shot through the mill window, and those candles are history. I stared at the weapon, both impressed and terrified. That could work, but you'd have to get close enough to fire it through a window. And they'll sense you coming. Not if they're distracted. She fixed me with a steady gaze. That's where you come in. I felt a chill run through me. What do you mean? Go back in there. Tell Thomas I'm coming willingly. That I'm curious, that I want to see the ritual. He'll be suspicious, but he'll want to believe it. His ego won't let him think otherwise. And then what? Then you make sure I get close enough to a window to use this. She hefted the flare gun. One shot, that's all I need. I considered her plan, seeing both its potential and its flaws. It could work, but it's risky. If Thomas realizes what you're doing before you can fire, then I'll be no worse off than if I tried to run, Eleanor said grimly. My family has been fighting the Umbra for generations. I'm not backing down now. Her determination was impressive, but I wasn't convinced. There's something else you should know. Thomas said the ritual requires a sacrifice from the Oak Ridge bloodline. That's why he wants you specifically. He believes your family has kept the Umbra contained for centuries. Eleanor's expression shifted, a flash of something like recognition crossing her face. That's partially true. My ancestor, Martha Oakridge, discovered the Umbra's weakness to certain types of light. She created a device, a lantern with specially treated glass, that could harm them. The knowledge has been passed down through our family ever since. Then why didn't you bring this lantern tonight? Because it was stolen, Eleanor said bitterly. 10 years ago, when Martha's journals were discovered in her attic. The lantern was with them, but it disappeared before I could secure it. She paused, her eyes widening. Wait, the black leather book. Does Thomas have it? An old book with shifting symbols on the pages? I nodded, surprised. Yes. He's been reading from it during the ritual. That's Martha's grimoire. It contains all her research on the Umbra, including how to permanently banish them or how to tear the veil between worlds. Eleanor's voice was urgent now. If he is both the grimoire and the lantern, he could actually succeed in tearing the veil permanently. The lantern? I haven't seen any lantern. It wouldn't look like a normal lantern. It would be small, made of dark metal with purple glass panels. He would need it for the final stage of the ritual. I thought back to what I had seen in the mill. There was something on the altar beside the grimoire, a small metal object covered with a cloth. I couldn't see what it was. Eleanor's face paled. That's it. That has to be it. We need to get in there now, before the ritual progresses any further. She stood, slinging her backpack over her shoulder and gripping the flare gun tightly. New plan. You go back in and tell Thomas I'm coming. Create a distraction if you can. I need to get close enough to see what's on that altar. And then I destroy the lantern. Without it, the ritual can't be completed. I nodded slowly, though doubt still gnawed at me. Be careful. Thomas is more powerful than you realize. So am I, Eleanor replied, a steely determination in her eyes. The Oak Ridge blood isn't just a liability, it's a weapon against the Umbra. My grandmother taught me things that aren't in any journal. With that cryptic statement, she gestured for me to lead the way back to the mill. I moved ahead, my mind racing. Was I making a terrible mistake by helping her? Or was this my one chance at redemption? As we neared the mill, I turned to Eleanor. Wait here until I signal you. I'll try to create a distraction, draw attention away from the entrance. She nodded, crouching behind a large rock. How will I know when to move? You'll know, I said grimly. Trust me. I flowed back into the mill through a crack in the wall, reforming inside and making my way toward the center where Thomas still stood in the candle circle. His chanting had grown louder, more frenzied, and the shadows around him seemed to be coalescing into something larger, something with form and purpose. Thomas, I called, forcing confidence into my voice. I've found Eleanor right. The chanting stopped abruptly. All eyes turned to me. Where is she? Thomas demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. Outside. She's coming willingly. She wants to witness the ritual. Thomas's purple eyes narrowed. Willingly? The Oak Ridge heir is coming willingly to her own sacrifice? I nodded. She's curious. She's spent her life researching the Umbra. She wants to see for herself before she decides. Decides what? Thomas repeated, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. Decides whether to join us, I said, improvising quickly. She's fascinated by the power you wield, Thomas. The Oak Ridge legacy has been a burden to her. She wants to understand the other side before she makes her choice. Thomas's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. How convenient. And you believe this sudden change of heart? I spoke with her. She's tired of fighting. Her family has been at war with the Umbra for generations, and for what? Perhaps it's time for a new approach. He stepped closer, the shadows swirling around him like a living cloak. You've changed since you left, haven't you? Something's different about you. I held his gaze, fighting to keep my expression neutral. I've seen what the Umbra can do. It's enlightening. Bring her in, Thomas commanded, returning to the altar. The ritual is at its peak. We must not delay. Actually, I said, moving toward the array of candles surrounding the altar, she requested something first. A demonstration of your power to convince her fully. Thomas hesitated, his hand hovering over the cloth-covered object, the lantern. What kind of demonstration? Show her the shadows. Let her see what awaits beyond the veil. A murmur ran through the assembled cultists. Thomas considered for a moment, then nodded. Very well. A glimpse of what's to come might be persuasive. He began chanting again, but this time louder, directing his words toward the rafters. The shadows above began to swirl and coalesce, forming a vortex of darkness that seemed to stretch both upward and inward at the same time. Now, I whispered, knowing Eleanor couldn't hear me but hoping she would seize the moment. As if on cue, a figure darted through the doorway, Eleanor moving with surprising speed and silence. The cultists were too entranced by the shadow vortex to notice her slip along the wall, making her way toward the side window I had mentioned. Thomas continued his chant, his voice rising to a fever pitch as the shadows above grew more solid, more defined. I could see shapes within them now, elongated limbs, too many eyes, mouths that shouldn't exist. Eleanor had reached the window. She raised the flare gun, taking careful aim at the altar. That's when everything went wrong. Thomas, one of the cultists shouted, pointing toward Eleanor. The window! Thomas whirled around, his eyes flashing with rage. With a gesture, he sent a wave of shadow racing toward Eleanor. She fired the flare gun just as the shadow struck her, knocking her sideways. The flare shot wide, striking the wall instead of the altar. The wall erupted in brilliant white light, magnesium and phosphorus burning through the aged wood. Cultists screamed, covering their eyes against the sudden brightness. Seize her! Thomas roared, pointing at Eleanor, who was struggling to her feet. I moved without thinking, falling across the room faster than human eyes could track. I reached Eleanor just as two cultists grabbed her arms. Let her go, I commanded, my voice deeper, more resonant than before. The shadows around me expanded, growing darker and more substantial. The cultists hesitated, looking to Thomas for guidance. Traitor, Thomas hissed at me. I knew you couldn't be trusted. You're right, I said, allowing my human form to dissolve further, embracing the shadow that had been growing inside me. I can't be trusted. Not by you. With a gesture, I sent shadows lashing out at the cultists holding Eleanor. They recoiled, releasing her arms. Run! I shouted to her. Get to the altar. Eleanor sprinted toward the center of the room where Thomas stood, protecting the covered lantern. The fire from the flare was spreading rapidly, engulfing the eastern wall of the mill and casting wild, dancing light across the room. Thomas began to chant again, faster now, more desperate. The shadows above responded, descending toward him like a protective cocoon. Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and crystalline, a vial of liquid that caught the firelight and broke it into rainbow fragments. Martha's light, she whispered, and hurled the vial at the shadow cocoon surrounding Thomas. The vial shattered against the darkness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a brilliant purple light erupted from within the shadows, expanding outward in pulsing waves. The shadows recoiled, shrieking with voices that shouldn't exist in our world. Thomas screamed, a sound of pure rage and frustration. The protective shadows around him were dissolving, leaving him exposed. Eleanor seized the opportunity, lunging forward and grabbing the cloth-covered object from the altar. She pulled the cloth away, revealing a small, intricately crafted lantern with purple glass panels. The Oak Ridge lantern, she breathed, holding it up. No! Thomas roared, lunging for her. I intercepted him, my shadowy form wrapping around his. It's over, Thomas. You don't understand what you're doing, he snarled, struggling against my grip. The Umbra will consume you too. You're one of us now. No, I said firmly. I'm something else entirely. Eleanor had opened the lantern and was reaching inside. She pulled out a small, pulsing purple crystal, the heart of the device. Without this, she said, holding it up, the lantern is just metal and glass. And without the lantern, your ritual fails. Thomas howled with rage, breaking free of my grip. He lunged toward Eleanor, shadows forming claws at his fingertips. I moved faster, placing myself between them. Thomas's shadow claws tore through my form, but I felt no pain, only a strange sense of displacement as my shadow self reformed around the attack. Eleanor, finish it! I shouted. She nodded, holding the crystal high. By blood and light, I seal the veil, she intoned, her voice carrying unexpected power. What was opened shall be closed. What was summoned shall be banished. The crystal in her hand flared with brilliant purple light. The grimoire on the altar began to smoke, its pages fluttering wildly as if caught in a wind that affected nothing else in the room. Thomas fell to his knees, clutching his head. No, 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 he moaned. We were so close. The vortex of shadows above was collapsing inward, the entities within retreating from the purple light emanating from the crystal. The fire had spread to half the mill now, cultists fleeing in panic as beams crashed down around us. We need to go, I urged Eleanor, who was still holding the crystal aloft, completing whatever ritual her ancestor had designed. Almost done, she said through gritted teeth. Just me too. A burning beam crashed down between us, sending sparks flying. Eleanor stumbled backward, nearly dropping the crystal. Eleanor! I called, trying to reach her through the flames. I'm all right, she shouted back. But we need to get out of here. I looked around for Thomas, but he was gone, whether fled or consumed by the shadows, I couldn't tell. The grimoire on the altar was fully aflame now, ancient pages curling and blackening. This way. I called, flowing toward a side door that was still relatively clear of flames. Eleanor followed, clutching both the crystal and the empty lantern. We burst out into the cool night air, gasping and coughing. Behind us, the mill was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the sky. Eleanor's team members were running toward us, shouting questions I couldn't make out over the roar of the fire. It's done, Eleanor said, looking down at the crystal in her palm. The veil is sealed again. What about Thomas? I asked, trying to regain my human form but finding it increasingly difficult. The shadows seemed to cling to me now, unwilling to release their hold. If he survived, he'll be back, Eleanor said grimly. But without the lantern and the grimoire, he won't be able to complete the ritual. She turned to me, really looking at me for the first time since we'd escaped. You're changing. I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. I'm not fully human anymore. Not after what Thomas did to me. But I'm not one of them either. What will you do now? She asked, her voice softer. I looked at my hands, which seemed to flicker between solid and shadow. I don't know. Find a way back to being human, if I can. Or learn to live with what I've become. Eleanor reached out, hesitating just before touching my shadowy arm. You saved my life in there. Whatever you are now, you're still you where it counts. She opened her backpack and carefully placed the crystal and empty lantern inside. My family has been researching the Umbra for generations. If there's a way to reverse what's happened to you, we'll find it. And if there isn't? She smiled, a determined glint in her eye. Then we'll discover a new way. The Oak Ridge legacy isn't just about fighting darkness, it's about understanding it. Finding balance. In the distance, sirens wailed. The fire department would be here soon, along with police and curious onlookers. You should go, Eleanor said. My team will handle the authorities. We've had plenty of practice explaining away the unexplainable. I nodded, already feeling myself dissolving into the shadows. Will I see you again? Count on it, she replied. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. As I melted into the darkness, becoming one with the night, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. I might not be human anymore, but I wasn't lost. Not completely. And in a world where shadows could gain consciousness and ancient lanterns could seal the veil between worlds, perhaps there was still a place for someone like me, caught between light and darkness, belonging fully to neither. For now, that would have to be enough. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.